Hey guys, let's do an audio check. Checking this lighting real quick. I might have too much lighting on. That's way too much there. How's my sound? Oh, thank you, Nanny Puffins. I didn't even see you. All right, I just gave 2 moderator wrenches out. OG Face Diaper, I met in person. Jen Bogler, I met in person in Florida. I have 2 more wrenches to give out, but I haven't seen their names yet. I was really impressed with Florida. I met a lot of people who have been following Archaics for a long time. It was really interesting actually seeing a person in the flesh that I only knew by a YouTube handle. It's awesome. Awesome. But this presentation is going to blow your mind. This is going to put everything in context for you. It's going to completely remove the mystery that is Christianity. I'm not saying it's removing Christianity. I'm saying it's removing the mystery, why the controversy exists, why so many people believe in this paradigm so strongly, like I did for 40 years of my life. And yet so many other people are vehemently against it, and yet it has so much evidence supporting it. We're dealing with an anomaly here, or is it? Did something get pulled on us? Did a psyop so massive get pulled on us that it took 15 centuries of church councils to cover it up? Yeah, guys, this video is going to get deep. And the only way we can ever truly broach the subject of the origin, the power, the unfolding of Christianity is to follow the Israelite migrations. The two do not seem to be connected, but I promise you, by the time we end this epic presentation, we're going 3 hours at least. We have to. This presentation is we're going to solve 2 major mysteries that are seemingly disparate, but they're not. They're intrinsically connected, and they were only separated by the church. And when I say the church, I'm talking about Rome. Like I said, guys, I don't embellish. You guys already know the architecture of my personality. I don't embellish, and nor am I going to hype something up that it's not deserving. You already know this about me. So I promise you, you're going to have some real aha moments. I've already given you many drops in many videos that we were leading up to this. Giving you many drops. Revelation was written in Greek. Revelation was written in Greek. The New Testament books were written in Greek. And I know some of you love to say, oh no, Jason, you're wrong. The New Testament was written in Aramaic or Hebrew first, then Greek. That's that good old Christian, Judeo-Christian programming kicking in. Even the very first copies of the Old Testament, as we'll see here, were all in Greek. That's right. I got a lighting issue here, don't I? Might be this thing here. I got a light set on the ceiling that puts out a rainbow cascading of lights on the entire ceiling. But by the time secondary light hits me, I don't know, it's got me looking pretty pale. Maybe it's my shirt. Maybe it's all the white in here. I don't know. You guys can see my background pretty good. All my books back here. All right. So I received an invite for somebody who has over 5 million subs. Pretty interesting. Never even heard of them before. Went to go check them out, and I was like, wow, every single video they drop is just massive amount of views. They seem to be very interested in me right now, and that's cool. All right, let's see. I'm going to get down to the bottom of my chat. Yeah, my shirt is reflecting a lot of light. It's probably it. Let me go and take that off. Nah, I'm not going to do that. I'll never hear the end of that. Hey, Meryl GG. Meryl GG is my crush in another dimension of arithmetic and a whole nother holography. Yeah, man. So, Christianity. We got over 1447 in the chat. That's the year of the Exodus. Now it's 1461. Christianity. Now, Vincent, I didn't flash you, I promise. Man, I got enough trouble as it is. I don't need that one going out. We got some amazing books to discuss, some amazing authors, research. We're going to go through the Israelite migrations, and oh my God, you guys are going to share this video. Many of you are going to listen to it again because this is the business. Matter of fact, I have somewhere in here, I might even see here, I have so many of these little drives. Oh, there it is right there. Here it is right here. For those of you who want to follow all this up later, I can post the transcript of this video if anybody wants it. I mean, it's going to be long, but my newest drive is the red drive. This is my newest drive. Almost sold out in Florida. This is the updated Chronicon with all the notes, but it's not just Chronicon. I also put my 400 best charts on here. You guys know I'm a chart drawer. I put a lot of charts together for chronology. It's all in this one drive right here. Somebody can post, one of my mods can post the email, archaixorders@protonmail.com. Let's see. But yeah, Christianity. So what are we talking about? What exactly do we mean by Christianity? What is it? God is the Word, the Lamb, the resurrection, born of a virgin, son of a carpenter. He was wounded by a spear, attended the Lord's Supper, descended to the underworld. He was slain to save mankind. That's the Christianity we're talking about. Resurrected on the third day. Body as bread is eaten and consumed by his worshipers. Divine Son of the Father crucified on a tree. Blood redeemed the earth. Born on December 25th, a star announced his birth. This is the Christianity we're talking about. Wise men traveled to the location of his birth, gave him precious gifts and presents. A king tried to kill him when he was a child. When he was 12 years old, he taught at the temple. This is the Christianity I'm referring to. Ministry began at 30 years of age. He fasted in the desert for 40 days, tempted by the evil one, baptized in water, did miracles and wonders, fed 500 people from a small basket. You all know the stories. You've read them, you've heard them, you've watched the documentaries. Established kingdom of righteousness. He had 12 disciples transfigured on a mount. He ascended bodily. He was called the Lord, the light of the world, the King of kings, the God of gods, the only begotten Son. This is the Christianity I'm telling you about. He's the Prince of Peace, the Son of Righteousness, the light of the world, the resurrection and the life, the Almighty, the Redeemer, the sin bearer. He was called the Good Shepherd, the Alpha and Omega. He came to fulfill the law. He would return in the last days. He was set into a manger, had a triumphal procession on the back of an ass. He will return on a white horse. He is one with the Trinity. He is the Son of God. He turned water into wine. His believers are born again and inherit life eternal. He suffered for mankind. He preached a Sermon on the Mount, was crucified with two thieves. He was known as the way, the truth, and the light. He was called the Messiah, the Son of Man, the Lamb of God, the Word made flesh, the Fisher of men, the Christ, the Anointed One. This is the Christianity I'm talking about. He was born during a tax time and would reign 1,000 years in the future. When he was crucified, the sun darkened at his death. In one of his most enigmatic titles, he was called the Lion of the tribe of Saki. I'm not talking about Jesus. I told you this video is going to blow your mind. But in order to understand the identity of the individual for which all these things were said about in the ancient world, way longer than 2,000 years ago, we need to trace the Israelite migrations because they're key to understanding biblical eschatology. Remember, we are studying a book of both good and evil that comes from a tree of knowledge of good and evil. And in order for us to get back to the tree of life eternal, we've been given two paths. The living dead, they open this book and they're hardened into believing that it's 100% the words of God and not of men and demons. The Bible is both a book of good and evil. It even purports that. It is the testimony of two peoples. We're going to be following one of those peoples. My Archaics TV already follows the other group. But today we're going to be talking about Israelites, who they were in ancient times, who they came to be, and who you are today. And in this discussion, there's going to be facts being dropped from different periods of history that's going to tell you exactly where Christianity came from. That's my introduction, guys. That's where we're going. Let me check my chat, make sure everything's right. I told you this is going to get deep, and yes, we're in for it. We're in for it. I just spilled a little coffee on my keyboard. Yeah, I don't have any paper towels in here. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I already know some of you women, OCD. Oh my God, he just used his shirt. All right. So, love you too, Darius. Hey, Bart. Uh-oh, I found who I was looking for. Rusty Woodpecker. Y'all excuse me for a second. Okay. Through the StreamYard app, I cannot assign a, just a second. I'm going into YouTube real quick. I'm going to go straight to this video. So I can give this guy a wrench real fast because I've been promising it. He used to have one. So y'all bear with me. Won't take but a second. Go up in here. View on YouTube. I'll turn that volume down. All right, Rusty Woodpecker, where are you at? I just seen you, and I already lost you in the chat. Rusty, I know you're listening. Go ahead and make any type of comment right now so you'll pop up at the bottom of the feed, and I can give you that wrench, and I can move on with this presentation. Any comment. So I can click on your name. Oh, you're under that 60-second deal. There he is. All right. All right, you got it. There it is. One more guy out of Florida that I met. A big guy, real cool. I'm looking for him. But meanwhile, I need to get out of here. Go and get out of YouTube. Get back in my StreamYard. All right, I'm back. All right, so good deal. Good deal. In the past, I've told you guys about Paul's epistles. I've told you, Paul's epistles, the letters of Paul, Apollonius. He never once mentions a historical background for Jesus. He never mentions Pilate, the Romans, Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin, Herod, Judas, Mary, all these major characters in Jesus' life and in the narrative of the gospel. Paul doesn't mention them. Paul does not mention any events in Jesus' life in the entire Passion. All his travels, nothing. Nothing. Paul never quotes Jesus' sermons. This is the man who wrote 50% of the New Testament. Paul never quotes Jesus' sermons, never quotes a parable, none of the prayers, never mentions the supernatural birth of Jesus, none of his miracles or wonders. Paul's Christianity could have been taught without any knowledge whatsoever of the gospel. Keep that in mind, guys. Keep that in mind. Now, in my presentations on archaics, I've already shown you the Anuna are the subject matter of the pre-flood vapor canopy world. 1,656 years of the pre-flood world wiped out in what's called the Typhon flood. This is the flood of Phoenix. In Genesis, it's called the Great Flood of Noah. The Greeks referred to it as the flood of Deucalion, the new wine sailor whose wife was named Pyrrha, like red wine. The Typhon flood was 2239 BC. This is already covered in multiple different presentations. After the flood emerged the descendants of the Anuna as ruling families, ruling dynasties over the rest of the world. The Anuna had vanished, but after the flood, their descendants had emerged as the most advanced. And in the cuneiform text, and I've given you presentations on these, they were called the Amuru. They were the Westerners. The chain of history starts with the Anuna, moves through history post-cataclysm to the Amuru. But the Amuru branch of families are the Western Semitic Indo-Iranian branch families. So, for 552 years, they established what is known as the Heleolithic Maritime Empire. You guys already know what happened. My Archaics veterans, you already know what happened in the 552nd year. The Ogygian deluge, also caused by Typhon, feared in Egypt the Great Phoenix. It destroyed the entire old Bronze Age world. All the children of the Sun dynasties collapsed, also called Shemsu-Hor, the shining ones. These people, they're all their dynasties collapsed, all their civilizations, and introduced a 25-year darkness. We had the Great Flood of Noah, then one Phoenix cycle later, 552 years, was the Ogygian deluge, also caused by Typhon. But this one started at 25-year darkness, volcanism, whatever you want to call it. But according to Hesiod, it introduced a new wave of giants. Why? Because that 25 years was a vapor canopy. We've talked about this in multiple different presentations. I'm merely giving you the background to basically the world, where the world was after this. You guys know it took 25 years for the world to wake up. This was the Egyptian Second Intermediate Period. This is when the Chaldeans admit that they began to record the movements of the stars as published 2,300 years ago by the Macedonian scholar Callisthenes under Alexander of Macedon. I've shown all these on charts and all these materials. This is just the background. Great darkness and famine for 25 years. All the Bronze Age children in the Sun dynasties collapsed. Now we have the Amuru being called by different names. They enter the biblical material as the Amorites, also the sons of Anak, the people of Arba. Also in Egypt, they are found on reliefs. They are called the Tamahu. The Amuru are now Tamahu. And the Tamahu are given derisive names like shepherd kings because the Egyptians could not stand shepherds. They called him Hyksos, which is almost like a cuss word. We have here many ancient historians that link the Hyksos to the ancient Israelites. They were hated by the native Egyptians because the Israelites were ruling over them. The story of Joseph in Egypt, the son of Jacob, there's truth in that story. The narrative may be fictional, but the fiction conveys actual historical facts. So 25-year darkness leads us to 1662 BC. All the civilizations of the old world begin to wake up at the exact same time. This is the subject matter I've told you guys about of W.J. Perry's book called Children of the Sun, which is 551 pages. Very, very unusual. But his entire book is all about the single year of 1687 BC, and that something unusual happened, and he never says what. He never says it was a flood. He never says it was some astronomical phenomenon, earthquakes. He doesn't know. All he knows is from the archaeology, every dynasty in the world collapsed at the exact same time. This is W.J. Perry. I've done a video on his book, Children of the Sun. So now, after this 25-year darkness in Babylonia, we have an invasion without armies, a silent invasion of Amuru. It's called the fifth dynasty of Babylon. It's the Amorite dynasty. It's the dynasty of Hammurabi, the lawgiver. Assyria, we have another family of Amuru. Elam, Aram, Canaan, Mycenae. In Mycenae, we have the mighty family of the dynasty of Arba. His son was Anax in the ancient pre-Greek texts. Anax is the same as in the Old Testament as Anak, the father of the Anakim giants. So we have this ruling dynasty in Ilium. Capital city was Troy, known as Tros. In the Hittite Empire and the Mitannian Empire of the Amorites, sister empires, both ruled by Amuru. In northern Egypt, at the ancient city of Anu, later called On, later called Memphis, after that called Heliopolis. All the same city. The closest thing to it today is Cairo, right outside the Great Pyramid. The temple districts here is where the Hyksos ruled. And the people of the Hyksos filled a garden realm that was absolutely beautiful called Goshen, the land of the nine bows. The ancient river of the Gihon, which we call the Nile today, flowed into it and separated into nine bows. And it had this beautiful fertile series of plains that led to the Mediterranean. This was the best land in Egypt, and it was occupied by the Israelites, according to the Old Testament. Now, and this is what begins our story, because 215 years of Israelite occupation over Egypt after the 25-year darkness, 240 years since the Ogygian deluge that started that 25-year darkness. In 215 years after the starvation and darkness period, it was plenty of time for civilizations to rebuild themselves, for human populations to explode. The world is brimming with people now. 215 years is a long time, guys. By comparison, you can see how the world has changed. It's 2024. It's 2024 now. But what was the world like in 1809? Think about all the development and how the population of the world has exploded since 1809. If something is true somewhere, it's probably true everywhere. This is the fundamental of the archaics research. It's one of my 5 main pitch phrases that describe my research. Therefore, if from 1809 to 2024, we can build this technologically advanced infrastructure and already start building worlds within worlds and simulated holographies that we call virtual reality, microcircuitry, nanotechnology. If they did it in the ancient times too. They advanced, and maybe they advanced in different ways. But the end of this 215-year period is the Exodus and the 10 plagues on Egypt. Or, if we go by the Chinese version from the Silk Almanacs, the Magawandi Silk Almanacs say that it was a giant celestial dragon with 10 tails that appeared in the sky. It was the exact same thing. Over Egypt, it was described in the Bible as the 10 plagues. In the Exodus version found in the very enigmatic and detail-specific Colburn Bible, we find that the doom shape appeared in the sky. In Egypt was fragmented, and it was cosmopolitan, and several different cultures all coexisted there with the indigenous Egyptians, the Cometians. Now, in prior presentations, I have educated you guys as to the 2 Egypts. Our history books, our scholars, they want us to believe that Egypt is a historical phenomenon for which Hollywood has given us an accurate picture of, and it's not true. It's not true at all. The 2 Egypts are 450 miles apart, and nothing is between them but desert. Now, though, you have to go back to my other presentations to understand the importance of the difference of the kingdom of Waset, Luxor, Karnak, Abydos. Everything in southern Egypt, not a single pyramid is in southern Egypt. Those are all temples, temple complex. They buried their pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings. Northern Egypt was 450 miles away, and it's full of over 130 pyramids. So there's a reason for that. But it's not the subject matter of this video. Prior archaics, my book, Lost Scriptures of Giza, goes into those details. What you need to understand here was this was the year 1447 BC. This was the year in 1440. I have another video that explains why we know the exact date of the Exodus. All the different rabbis, all the Jewish encyclopedias, all the Christian chronographers that have cited that year. Emmanuel Velikovsky, R.A. Boole, a U.S. cryptologist whose side hobby was world chronology, he too, 1447. El Menahim wrote a book called The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings. Using biblical chronology and the Talmud, he determined 1447 BC was the Exodus. Using the Phoenix timeline of 138-year periods and putting the structuring of world chronology from the Olympiads, the Roman Julian calendar, going all the way back to the 5th millennium BC, 1447 BC is exactly how we date the Exodus. Using just the clues in the book of Jasher, the book of Jubilees, and the book of Genesis, we find that the Exodus was in 1447 BC. Biblical chronologist Stephen Jones and his epic work, The Secrets of Time, using the book of Jasher, the book of Jubilees, and the Assyrian eponyms, discovered that the exact date for the Exodus was 1447 BC, which translates to 2448 of the Old World's calendar, which is interesting because in the Orion prophecy by Reno Radensink and somebody else, I've quoted it often, I just can't remember the other guy's name, but they found an ancient Egyptian text that said 2448 was the number for cataclysm. And Archbishop James Ussher, 362 years ago, when he published Annals of the World, he specifically wrote and dated that the exodus of Israel from Egypt occurred in the year of the world 2448. These are just a few, guys. I didn't cite them all. I don't have them all memorized, but these are just a few of the chrono markers that we have showing that this is the exact date. But the exact date, that's just me and my OCD. It's not even relevant for this presentation. All right. Check my chat. So we have this disaster in Egypt, and in this Egyptian disaster, we are told in the Old Testament that a body of Israelites left Egypt by land, crossed over the Red Sea, which is not impossible. Earthquakes have split the Red Sea at 3 times in the historical record where you can walk across it. But crossed the Red Sea, went into the desert of Sinai, wandered for 40 years before they invaded Canaan, Argob, Bashan, all the areas of Phoenicia, Philistia, all that area. So what we call modern day Israel and Jordan today. So this is the story of the Exodus. This is the story we have by those who came out of Babylon, taking all these records and rewriting all these histories and injecting themselves as the center of attention in all these historical records for which they were not participants in previously. This too is not the subject matter of this video, but I have prior presentations where I show you guys the difference between the Old Testament histories and the Old Testament histories according to the Jews. Huge, vast differences. And in putting together the book of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Torah, in putting together the Torah after the Babylonian captivity, because all biblical scholars date the Old Testament to after the Babylonian captivity, because there isn't a single archaeological or textual historical clue that the Old Testament even existed or was known by anybody in the entire world prior to the Jews coming out of Babylon after 537 BC. So we have this huge story of this overland journey, but somebody was lying. The lie is by omission. And I'm going to tell you now, correcting this lie totally makes sense of the entire New Testament. The lie was introduced that there was an overland journey to Israel, Canaan, Phoenicia, Aram, Syria, the 5 cities of the Philistine, Pentapolis, what we call modern Israel and Jordan today. The lie is that there was only one Exodus. There was only one group. And the lie is perpetuated even today among these people because they do not want the true Israelites today to ever figure out who they really are. But in the historical record, we don't have one group leaving Egypt. We have 3. 3 separate groups left Egypt in the Exodus. And the group that wrote the most in the Old Testament omitted the other 2 groups from the Old Testament, erased them from the Old Testament, took their writings and put Jewish names instead of the Israelites that were the actual authors of those older texts. They totally omitted 2 major groups from the family of Israel and put themselves at the center. And it wasn't until the New Testament writings started surfacing that somebody put all these together because they knew the truth. And in the New Testament writings, we have this massive Christian story, but its origin was not 2,000 years ago. The fundaments of the Christian story that I read off earlier, all the details about the gospel, they're ancient. We're going to get into all this. That's what this presentation is about. We're going to put these other 2 groups back where they belong in the family of Israel. And then we're going to follow them through history. I'm going to show you who they became. And I'm basically going to tell you who you are today. This is where it's going. I'm still in my introduction, guys. Check my chat. Let's see. It's all good. Right. Face diaper. You behave now, man. I just saw you say something, but it wasn't bad. I'm just saying. Sometimes I have flashbacks to your earlier days. It's good stuff. All right. Going in. One of the major groups that was omitted by the writers of the Old Testament are the people of Danao. Now, Danao was remembered in the Old Testament as Dan, the tribe of Dan. But they were quickly omitted, and the writers of the Old Testament even cursed them and removed them from the family of Israel. A lot of you know your Bibles, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, how Dan was removed from the Israelite roster. Dan, the Danao, were a massive fleet of ships that left Egypt, crossing the Mediterranean the same time that the other Israelites walked from Egypt, passed over the Red Sea, and went to Israel. The Danaan, as they were known in the ancient world, and they are found in Mycenaean writings, they are found in the Greek writings, the Achaean writings, they are found in traditions going all the way to ancient Ireland. The Danaan left in a massive amount of fleets of ships. Some of those ships landed in what's called Ionia because the Danaans were worshippers of Io. Io is actually pronounced Yo. They were worshippers of Yo. Yo was a cow goddess. Historians like Gerald Massey, Robert Graves, they declare that Io was a Greek version of an Egyptian goddess. This massive group of Israelite descended peoples, the Danaan, they founded 7 cities in Turkey. You know the names of those cities: Ephesus, Thyatira, Smyrna. You know them. Those same 7 cities that Paul wrote letters to in the New Testament when he said that he was writing letters to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. On the other fleet of Danaan went to the Peloponnesus. There were already people there, but they overwhelmed them and they became the ruling elite. These are the people of the Achaeans. The Achaeans and the Danaan became one people. The reason this is important for you to know is because this is the origin of the Graikoi. The Graikoi is a name from the people who used to live right around an ancient oracle that came from Egypt called Dodona. The oracle of Dodona was tended by the Graikoi. And when the Danaan came and lived among the Achaeans, after 100 years or so, they were all being called Greeks from the Graikoi, the people of the oracle. Ancient Greece was founded by Israelites. And as we'll see, you're going to see so many biblical Israelite institutions found in the ancient Greek practices. You're going to understand why the New Testament was not written in Hebrew first. It wasn't written in Aramaic first. The oldest copies of the New Testament were all written in Greek. Jesus never quoted the Hebrew Masoretic text. Jesus and his disciples, when they quoted scripture, they only quoted. This is according to scholars. This is Jason telling you this. Academia has found all the references of Jesus quoting Old Testament scripture. And it's all from the Greek Septuagint text. And many biblical scholars have been perplexed by the fact that the Hebrew Masoretic text literally reads as if it's a new construction based off an older Greek parent text. Yeah, guys, this is going to go deep. Someone wanted us to have a Bible. And in that Bible, they wanted us to believe it was 100% the Word of God. And in that Bible, they wanted us to believe that they were the children of God and we were something lesser, that they were first and that we were second. And in order to pull this off, they literally had to remove an entire series of cultures from the scriptures. And we only find them in the historical records. 2 exodus from Egypt, one by land, by the deceivers, one by sea, the navigators, the descendants of the Heliolithic maritime empire, the descendants of the Amuru, the Westerners, Western Semitic Indo-Iranian people. And the 3rd exodus was the exodus of Cecrops, another Israelite descended patriarch. Cecrops led his people to Boeotia, and from Boeotia they settled and built a community that later became known as Athens. I believe some of the biblical materials were addressed to the Athenians. Those of you who know your New Testament know what I'm talking about. The Athenians, the central hub and capital of the Greek states. I said Greek states because there were many. In fact, it was the Olympics of Greece that was begun in celebration of the fact of the 12 states of the Olympians coming together. The origin of the word Olympia is going to surprise you as well. 3 different groups left Egypt in the Exodus. We've only been told the story of one. I'm going to tell you the other 2 right now. My internet's going good. Everything's fine. Let's see. Oh, yeah, classical narcissism. I agree, Pam. I see some new names in the chat. Then again, that's not uncommon, but so everything I'm revealing to you guys today is on my newest drive. This is my 4th drive. You know I have a library drive of 7,147 books. It's more old books going, books that are all English translations in the last 400 years. More old books you'll ever read in your life. I can't read that many in my life. 7,147 books. I have another drive that's actually a combination of 2 older drives called the Super Pack and the Survival Pack. And it's just a tremendous amount of archaics-related research and data and images and all that. Also videos, Phoenix videos and Anuna videos. And then I'll have another drive that's, Martin Leakey and I combined tens and tens of thousands of old images. My contribution came from the Archaics Library. About 20,000 old pictures, and he had about 35,000 old pictures from that he put together. So I think that's all the drives. I may be missing one, but this is the new one. This is all of Chronicon as a PDF, a single PDF, so you don't have things you got to open up and open up files. All that's been done away with. It's one single PDF that just goes on and on and on and on. It's all a Chronicon in chronological order with all the notes and 400 charts. That'll help you get through it, because charts are how we do this, guys. As a matter of fact, speaking of charts, let's look at this real quick. Before I continue on, I know I'm going to share my screen. Speaking of charts, I do believe I have a chart for you. There we go. This is the Mediterranean world. You're looking at Egypt in the bottom left corner right here. Here's Egypt, right there. In the bottom right corner is Egypt. Right next to Libya. You see the red arrow curving, going over the Red Sea, curving into ancient Israel. That is the story we've been told in the Old Testament. It's not untrue. A lot of it's been proven to be true. Huge mass migration in the Exodus period. But it's only part of the story. The people who moved in this area recorded what they wanted to record and literally omitted massive amounts of families of their own culture who went somewhere else, for which the New Testament was addressed to. The authors of the New Testament wanted to correct this disservice to the historical record. This is why we have Jesus specifically saying, I am not here but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Paul's letters were written to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and when you look at the titles of the letters, they're to the people of the Miletus, Ephesus, Smyrna, Lydia, Sardis, Mysia, all these places. Chios, Samos, Thessaly, the Thessalonians. Yeah, guys, it's all right here. It's all right here. And what we're going to learn about what these people believed is going to blow your mind. Here's the two blue arrows of the two massive fleets of Israelite descended peoples from Egypt who settled Greece. This is Boeotia and the Peloponnesus. This is the origin of the people called Hellenes. This is them. They are Israelites. All right. All right. So every bit of this information that I'm divulging in this is in Chronicon. You can read it yourself. But Chronicon cites sources. When you read facts in Chronicon, it's going to tell you chapter and verse where that material came from. So, I'm going to introduce you to the historical Jesus and the mythical Christ. This is Gerald Massey, 1870s, 1880s. This is my research here. Just so you guys know, this is 3 pages of prophecies all found in the Bible. This is 3 pages of prophecies found in the Bible. If your people have not fulfilled these, you're not Israelites. These 3 pages of all biblical prophecies all found throughout the Old and New Testaments, are going to require an entirely separate video. But I can literally go through a Bible and read every one of these prophecies. And by the time I'm done, you're going to know who Israelites are and who they're not, simply based off who has fulfilled these prophecies and who hasn't. Now, that's a separate video, guys. That's just too much. It's too much for this one. Another one. The world's 16 crucified saviors, Kersey Graves, over 100 years ago. It is a massive text. It is a massive text. This is a source material for the information we're going to be talking about. Again, Gerald Massey. Most people haven't read him. It's the 1883. Gerald Massey. Massive book. This book is huge. Over 1,000 pages. It's huge, guys. Again, I studied this in prison. I know it back and forward, back and forward. And I'm telling you now, this is a source for the information that you're getting. Oh, Shiva, I know you know this. You're the one that won this book and got it. History of the Christian Religion to the year 200, Charles Waite. Again, 100 years old and absolutely packed, explaining the origin of every single New Testament text. This is it. Awesome book. It too is packed. These are all these books and many, many more are cited in Chronicon. But this is good enough for now. All right. Man, I am glowing. Man, I'm angelic today. Look at that. I don't know why my lighting looks like this. I got an old antique lamp here. I got this lamp. No, I don't know, man. Maybe you know what? I'm gonna try something. Oh no, that's the wrong one. That was the wrong one there. All right. Let's see here. I don't know what lighting that was. All right. Yeah, I'm glowing. I'm just gonna have to glow, guys. That's all that is. Just gonna have to glow. I don't know what's going on. So, reliefs. Reliefs on the Temple of Luxor. I know a lot of you don't know this. Some of you do. But reliefs on the Temple of Luxor, Egypt. Those pictures, they show the Annunciation, the Immaculate Conception, the birth and adoration of Horus. They show the Virgin Isis. They also show Neph. Neph is Kneph. Neph is the ancient Egyptian equivalent to the Holy Ghost. On the Temple of Luxor, near the Virgin Isis, stand 3 kings carrying gifts to be presented to baby Horus. Also in Egypt, can't make this stuff up, guys. One of the most famous Psalms in the Old Testament is Psalms 23, but it is an exact copy of an ancient Egyptian text. Green, you already know it. Green pastures, still waters. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. O Amen, who art in heaven, all Egyptian. So, this is the religion of ancient Egypt during the Exodus. This is what the Israelites had come in contact with. How do we know? Because the Amuru in Sidon, in Tyre, in Argob, in Bashan, in the mountains of Syria, the kingdom of ancient Amorite Mitanni, they too had the same religion. At this exact same time in history, 35 centuries ago, the Canaanites maintained a most similar faith. A 3,500-year-old Phoenician Canaanite tablet has been discovered. It is now in the British Museum. It reads that Baal, which means the Lord, it says Baal was taken prisoner. He was led away to a mountain with 2 other prisoners, and one prisoner was released by the people. And then Baal was sacrificed next to the other prisoner on a mount, and his garments were taken. He was put in a tomb, but his body vanished, and he was sought out by women who were weeping. And the text says, but Baal has resurrected, and he appeared to his followers after they removed a stone from the entrance to the tomb. This was the religion of the Exodus. This is what the people believed in ancient times. They believed in the anointed one, which is Christ. They believed that he would one day come, and that those were the circumstances of his coming. In many civilizations, the same faith was held that it had already happened about 600 years earlier. We'll get to that. This was 1447 BC in the Exodus. These disasters that fragmented Egypt into warring partitions and kingdoms, and these massive groups of Israelites who the Egyptians called Hyksos, shepherd kings, whom the Egyptian reliefs call Tamahu, who were huge, white-skinned, almost giant. Compared to the Egyptians, they were giants. They were 2 heads taller than any Egyptians. And the Tamahu finally got out of their kingdom, and it started a whole new type of weird religion that Egypt had never known before. This exodus removed the ruling power structure, and they went and founded ancient Greece. They went and founded ancient Canaan. They went and founded Israel. Two groups, but one group was 2 peoples, but they were still kin. They were still related. So 218 years later, which is equivalent to our 1806, you see how much the world has changed since 1806. Well, from the Exodus, in the migration of these peoples to ancient Greece and ancient Israel, was 218 years to the fall of Troy. The next series of disastrous events, the invasion of the Sea Peoples Federation. We know of these people as the Atlanteans. Where exactly Atlantis was is still up for debate. But Plato said Atlantis was on an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and that Atlantis and its island are no longer visible because it sank below the ocean after this invasion. We also know in Chronicon that right after the fall of Troy, there was a major disaster. There was worldwide quakes, sun darkenings, fallout from the sky. Whole civilizations vanished, especially in the West, in the Americas. Yeah, we already know this. It was 1135 BC. The Typhon had returned, the Phoenix disaster. It's also the background for some very interesting Danaan information. But in 1229 BC, the fall of Troy, King Agamemnon of Mycenae was at war with the Hittites. He was trying to get access to the Black Sea, but the Black Sea was controlled in the Dardanelles by the Kingdom of Ilium. The Kingdom of Ilium was a finger of the Hittites. So the Sea Peoples Federation came in, and they destroyed everybody. They didn't care who was allied to who. They came in, 2 invasions of Egypt. Some of the invaders escaped and ended up settling what was known as Philistia. They were the Philistines. Also appearing at that time was the Sea Peoples came in and settled everywhere from Sardinia and Corsica and Crete and all the coasts of Libya, and just fleets and fleets of ships came from this area right before the Atlantean civilization was destroyed, for which Solon and Plato gave us many historical details. So we have Phoenicians and Philistines. They appear, and the fall of Hittite Anatolia, the fall of the Hittites, actually empowered the Israelite power structures, which was known as Ionia. The Ionians, these Israelite descended peoples in their capital city of Miletus in the state of Caria. It was a shipping dynasty. And of course, they were the descendants of the Heleolithic Maritime Empire. So the shipping isn't, remember the Old Testament says, why does Dan remain in ships? This is why they were removed from the Israelite roster. So we have this Phoenix destruction, 1135 BC, and this is very integral to our story. The reason it's integral to our story is because it started what's known as the Great Mediterranean Dark Age, lasted over 300 years. The Phoenix destroyed the world in 1135 BC, set everybody back. Literacy plummeted. However, it is widely known in anthropology that just because a reset occurs, just because a people lose their infrastructure, does not mean they lose their religion. They still maintain their mysteries, their practices, their oral traditions. And this is This is why this ancient faith in the Lord, the Anointed One, suddenly during 300 years of the Great Mediterranean Dark Age, now fragmented into multiple different cultures, as we're about to see. It was everywhere. This is what happened. Pharaoh Seknakti recorded that Egypt was falling apart. And it was his last recording, 1135 BC. We never heard from Seknakti again. So out of the silence of this great Mediterranean Dark Age, our story of Israel actually begins. The Amuru, the Western Semitic branch of the Indo-Iranian people, they settled Libya and Mauritania in North Africa. You know them more popularly as Berbers. Phoenicia, Canaan, Syria, Phrygia in Anatolia, Ionia, which is all along the coast, the 7 cities of the New Testament that Paul wrote letters to. Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, Sardinia, all of these became populated with Israelite populations. Their great cities coming out of that dark age of 300 years were Tyre and Sidon, Tarsus, Kadesh, Byblos, Ugarit, Miletus, Athens, Thebes. Remember, Thebes was specifically founded. Those of you who have read my Chronicon, you know Thebes was specifically founded by a Phoenician Israelite branch people among a Greek population. And the separation in time was centuries. So the people that were living there had already forgotten that they were Israelite, although they recognized many of the institutions of the Thebans. But it caused problems, which is the very first historical event of ancient Greece, which is called the 7 against Thebes. 7 different cities attacked Thebes. The second historical incident in the ancient Greek narrative, according to Greek historians, is the fall of Troy. So the reason why Greek history doesn't go back like other nations does is because the Greeks even admit their own histories began with the 7 against Thebes. But it began at that time only because they had come from somewhere else. So coming in this during the Dark Age, during this Mediterranean Dark Age, the fleets of the Danaan kept settling different Mediterranean coasts. They even settled southern Italy before Rome became powerful. This is why the southern third of Italy was all Greek. You guys know the Cumaean Sibyl. She was Greek. She was a Greek oracle in Italy. Also, Tarsus is in Anatolia, where the 7 cities of Ionia are, in Turkey. But the Danaan kept building more and more colonies, and in southern Spain, they established Tarshish. And in the Old Testament, it's a famous place called the Ships of Tarshish, known for exporting all kinds of fleets in trade and human cargo, all that. The ships of Tarshish were widely sought in ancient times. So we have the Danaan in 1135 BC using the Phoenix phenomenon to their advantage, and they beat the Firbolgs and landed on the coasts of ancient Ireland. And they entered into the ancient Irish annals of Clonmacnois in the Book of the Four Masters, not as the Danaan, but as the Tuatha De Danaan. And when they appeared, they defeated the giants called the Firbolgs because the sun darkened, and it terrified the Firbolgs, and it allowed the Danaan to win what was known as the Second Battle of Moytura, the battle for the Field of Towers. So this is all in the historical record, in the traditional record, excuse me. I'm allergic to Firbolgs. So just 3 years later, in ancient Ireland, we have 1131 BC. It's in Chronicon. This begins an ancient Greek institution in Ireland. It is called the Games of Meath. The Games of Meath in Ireland were founded by the Danaan. These were just physical contests These were sports, but they were kin to the Olympics, which was an Israelite institution. The Olympic truce, the peace, the olive wreaths. Yeah. So the winners of the games of meat, they won wives. They got wives. This is what they won. And they were also in the games of meat. They exhibited a practice called the heroic code. The heroic code was honored. In many of my presentations in the past, I've explained to you guys the heroic code, ancient Bronze Age institution. It was Israelite. The heroic code was conducted on the field of battle. It was Amuru. The Amuru were the ones that were always doing it, and it was essentially when two armies met. Sometimes the outcome of a contest could be done between champions instead of the bloodshed that a whole battle would entail. David and Goliath were champions. One was Israelite, one was Philistine. David killed Goliath. He became, and the Philistines left. Didn't always happen that way. The Battle of Troy, many champions went forward. Many champions died, and still it wasn't decided. They still attacked Troy, but they did it by subterfuge. They did it with a Trojan horse. The horse was the symbol of the Atlanteans. The Atlanteans, one of their major cities in Atlantis was Poseidonia. So they were worshippers of Poseidon. Poseidon was a god of horses and earthquakes, but strangely, he was a god of the sea. Why? Because the Atlanteans were a mariner race, and in the archaeological record, they are known as the Sea Peoples Federation. So we have these people in ancient Ireland of Israelite pedigree establishing the games of Meath and doing and engaging in the heroic code. 10 years later, another fleet arrives, but not in Ireland. It arrives not in ancient Erin. It arrives in ancient Albion, which is Britain. And this is Brutus with 324 ships, and he founded a city called Trojanova. Trojanova just means New Troy. So later it became Londinium. You guys know what Londinium is. Today it's called London. So we have Israelite descended peoples that are starting to fill up all these chains of islands and all these different places. And then moving through history in the Old Testament, we get to the year 945 BC. We're still in the great Mediterranean Dark Age, but it's starting to end. 945 BC, we have a mention of 20 Phoenician cities under King Hiram of Tyre in northern Israel, assimilating with the Israelites. We have a record in the Old Testament of 20 Israelite cities, that were purchased by King Hiram of Tyre, who seems to be a very integral player in the Masonic Lodge writings and in the Masonic degrees. But King Hiram of Tyre bought 20 Israelite cities and then assimilated them into Phoenicia. The Old Testament makes a big deal about this, but I'm going to tell you now, the anthropologist, the archaeologist already knows Phoenicians and Israelites are the same people. There is no distinction. So the only difference that you could possibly find in that part of the world between these peoples would be that Texans are Americans and Californians are Americans, but Californians ain't Texans. So just a few years later, it's 931. Just a few years later, it's 931 BC. This is the Great Israelite Civil War. Coming straight out of the Mediterranean Dark Age now, we have the Civil War of Israel. This is the only group participating in the Civil War, though, are the ones that traveled from Egypt in the Exodus by land and went to Canaan and Bashan and Argob and Philistia and southern Aram and Syria, what we know of as Israel today in Jordan. The group that left Israel on foot have now become massive, populated, and there's a huge civil war. This civil war involves 10 of the northern kingdoms of the Israelites. Well, it's one kingdom called the House of Cumri, the House of Omri in the Old Testament. But in the cuneiform of surrounding nations, they were called the people of Cumri, the land of Cumri, or the kingdom of Cumri, the House of Cumri. So the civil war is 10 tribes of the northern kingdom go to war against the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom is Judah and parts of Benjamin. This is the first. Most people don't know this, but if you read the Old Testament carefully, you will find that there are 4 violent conflicts between the Israelites of the north and the Judahites of the south. They never got along. The Israelites of the north were always honoring the ancient goddess Sarah. The groves that they honored her in were called the Asherim. This is Asherah. They also honored the Lord, the one called the Anointed One, the Christ, the Krishna. But they called him Baal, which is just a Phoenician word that means Lord. Their religion was very different than the Yahwist religion of the South. In the South, they had assigned a different contract. They were living under a different covenant. There are totally different prophecies and promises that are found in Leviticus, Numbers, and in the Levitical portions of the Old Testament as opposed to the Aaronic. The Aaronic passages read very differently. It's different prophecies. The eschatology is not the same. There's a huge difference from the descendants of Judah who followed Yahweh from the burning bush and the descendants of Brahma and Saraswati, Indo-Iranian Amuru of the Western Semitic branches. And Sarah, like I said, Sarah was honored later all throughout Canaan in the places called the Asherams, in the goddess Asherah, who was the consort of the Lord, Baal. So this is ancient Israelite faith. But the civil war starts in 931 and it continues for a while. This begins what is known. Now Israel, land-based Israel, has now done exactly what Egypt did 400 years earlier. It's called the Two Kingdoms period in the Old Testament. 931 BC starts the Two Kingdoms period, the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom. By this time of 931 BC, the growing Assyrian Empire of the Northeast, they struck terror in the hearts of all their neighbors. By their proximity, the Israelites were particularly vulnerable. The Israelites, many took to ships. This is in the Bible. Many of them took ships from Phoenician ports to parts unknown, to the North African coast, to the Aegean Islands, to Crete. Crete was at this time not called Crete. It was called Yah Dan. Yah being the same as Yo, which is Io, the Egyptian cow goddess. Yah Dan, established by the Israelite Danaan, was the name of Crete. Now, some went to Asia Minor and the Peloponnesus, but they left Israel. In fact, I think I'm going to go through it right here. I'm not quite sure, but in the Old Testament, there are 4 separate events where it specifically states that many Israelites just packed up all their stuff and they vanished from the pages of the Old Testament. Whole migrations. And this fulfills absolutely the prophecies that are told of the descendants of Abram, Brahma and Saraswati. So that they would literally travel to all 4 corners of the earth. They would fill up the coasts of the earth and the islands of the earth in their wanderings, and they would found mighty nations that would become empires. This is the prophecy of the Israelites. Those prophecies also say that they would forget who they were. They would wander in darkness for a period of 3 turnings. And we are told that turnings, a day unto the Lord is as 1,000 years. So other presentations, I show you guys how 931 started the 3,000 years. So 3,000, it's 1,000 years to the total absolute destruction of Jerusalem. It's 1,000 years to the Renaissance era of the medieval times, when all the European nations are now well established and they are all completely descended from Israelite families. And then 1,000 years after that is in the middle of the Great Tribulation, when something magnificent happens and the Israelites remember who they are. Now, this is when they are no longer Manasseh. In the Old Testament, the Israelites are cursed to be Manasseh, which means they will forget who they are. They will walk in blindness, forget their pedigree and everything, and they will become Ephraim in the last days. Israel's last days title in eschatology is not Israel anymore. It's Ephraim. Doubly bountiful. They will remember who they are. Now, let's see. So it was at this time, 931 BC, massive export of Israelite peoples are leaving the pages of the Bible and disappearing into the Mediterranean. It was at this time that the Ionic states of the Greek world experienced a massive resurgence, according to archaeology. Now, the Israelites kin to the Ionians, who are also descended from Israelites, they were descended from the Danaan, bringing a new impetus to Hellenic life. The word Hellenic is in Hellenic. Again, we have a recognition of the people of El Elyon. These were all Phoenician and Canaanite titles for Baal, the Lord. The Milesian state of Asia Minor at this time was deluged with Israelites. Others sailed to Sardinia, Sicily, Spain, Italy, and to the British Isles. There was a swelling of the Phoenician colonies as well, and colonial populations throughout the coast of the Mediterranean that were founded by Phoenicia, which were descended from the Israelite family of nations. It was at the end of the great Mediterranean Dark Age, at this time, that suddenly a new cult appeared. And it appeared and infiltrated all the Israelite family of nations throughout the Middle East. This cult is the cult of Apollo. It was an import from the Far East. It entered Greece after the Olympians were already established around 1000 BC. But Apollo quickly became the most Greek of all the Greek gods. He came to the mainland Greece by way of Ionia in Asia Minor, which were Israelite descendant peoples. We'll get back to Apollo, the subject matter of the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation, as I told you in prior presentations, was not written by John on the Isle of Patmos. That was a church lie. The core subject material of the book of Revelation comes from the Sibylline oracles that were preserved in the writings of Cerinthus, a student of the Gnosis, who knew the damage that the cult of Apollo had done to the families of Israel. 883 BC, the Phoenician colony Carthage is now founded as a city, and it gets given a charter. It becomes a great city, and a huge population of Israelites help build the core people of Carthage. This is northern Africa. Many of these people will later be called Berbers. 881 BC, King Omri of Israel built the city of Samaria, capital city of the northern kingdom of Israel. For those of you who don't know, you can verify this in Bible dictionaries, Bible commentaries. I don't care how you fact check it. But the temple in Jerusalem is not the largest structure in ancient Israel. It's the one that they try to get you to focus on. But archaeologists already know that the temple of gigantic ashlar blocks in the ancient city of Samaria, which is the capital of the Israelite kingdom, not the Judean, is far larger and more impressive than the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It was, in fact, according to Biblical Archaeology Review and several other sources, the temple in Samaria is the largest second millennium BC structure in all of Israel. But you don't hear about that in the Old Testament, because the builders of that temple were already gone before the people of the southern kingdom of Judah came into possession of their libraries and rewrote all their texts and omitted them from their own histories. Again, that's my dark scriptures playlist material there if you want to know more about that. Now, the surrounding nations knew of Israel, but they called Israel by the name of its dynasty. They were the house of Qumri. 867 BC, a famine afflicted Israel in Samaria during the reign of Queen Jezebel. Now, the scriptures reveal in the Old Testament that the famine was particularly bad and that there was no food and water. And really interestingly, the prophet Elijah commanded the people. This is in the Old Testament. The prophet Elijah commanded the Israelites to pack your things and migrate away from Israel. You don't learn about all this in Bible study. You don't learn about all this. The entire Old Testament seemed to be focused on this little part of the world. But when people leave that part of the world and become mighty nations elsewhere, the same eschatology, the same religion, the same practices, the same institutions, and the same prophecies that were in part here are now piecemeal everywhere. They apply to all. This is what we have happening here. The unfolding of biblical prophecies found in the book of Genesis that was specifically the promises and the blessings of Abram, and Saraswati, recorded as Sarai, and then later Sarah. Yeah, those promises, those institutions, that's what we find unfolding with the migrations of Israel. So we have a prophet in the Old Testament, Elijah, telling people, migrate, go. The way you're going to save yourself so you can eat is to get away from Israel. So Phoenician colonies of the Mediterranean as far as Spain were now swelling with Israelites. Colonies of the Mediterranean, fleets of Israelites landed in Cyprus. They sailed on to the coastal cities of the Ionian Kin in Asia Minor, the 7 cities that Paul wrote when he called them the lost sheep of the house of Israel. All throughout the Aegean in the Peloponnesus among the Hellenes, the Hellenic cultures. Now we have a fresh Israelite blood coming to replenish the older stock that had basically through exogamy and assimilation had mixed with the local populations. The Iberic stock and the Aegean, the Achaeans, ancient people of Argos. So we have the Danaan cultures now receiving Israelite blood from those who had walked from Egypt. We have in Greece, we have a collection of peoples coming out of the great Mediterranean Dark Age in around 800 BC, when Homer's Odyssey appeared, when Homer's Iliad appeared, when the writings of Theognis appeared, Hesiod, Works and Days, when the most ancient Greek epics suddenly appeared. We have Israelites now from all 3 Exodus cultures. The 2 that went to Peloponnesus and Boeotia in Greece, and the 1 that went overland to Israel. Coming out of the great Mediterranean Dark Age, now we have the blood of all 3 in Greece. And according to historians, it is the 8th century BC that began what is known as what we know of today as Greek culture. It was the 8th century BC when the Greek Olympiad calendar began. All right. Check my chat. I've been running my mouth for a while. I told you guys this is going to be a kind of a long presentation. It has to be. Let's see. All right. Homer Simpson. I didn't know Homer Simpson was that old. What? Yes, the Welsh are Israelite stock, no doubt. The Picts, the Welsh, the Cornish, 100%. I'm gonna get to that. But they're just branches off one major family. The Israelite family of nations is huge. All right. Chat looks good. So, what brought ancient Greece out of its slumber? What brought them out of the great Mediterranean Dark Age that started in 1135 BC? The background story for the sinking of Atlantis and the Sea Peoples Federation, the Great War of Ilium and Troy, and the fall of the Hittite culture. What brought Greece out of the great Mediterranean Dark Age was a fleet of their own kin replenishing their stock and bringing new ideas, technology, engineering, infrastructure, and families into the Greek mainland and all the surrounding little islands. This is straight out of the pages of the Old Testament into the pages of the New Testament people. That's what it is. 855 BC, in the year 4 of the annals of King Shalmaneser III of Assyria, we find that he attacked the city of the king Nikdim. Or could be Nikdimi. I think it's Nikdimi. It's Nikdime. Now, his people fled in ships. Most of them got away from the Assyrians. They knew they couldn't fight the Assyrians. They left in ships. Amazingly, archaeologists have found ancient texts at Ugarit, an Israelite city, that describe the expulsion of the Ionian population with King Nichmedi, or whatever his name is. And that archaeologists, linguists know that Nichmed is an old Greek name later adopted by King Nicomedes. King Nicomedes was the king of a Greek city-state called Nicomedia. Ugarit had been destroyed by the Sea Peoples in the 13th century BC during the Trojan War, but it had been reoccupied by the Ionians, the Danaan, who worshipped the cow goddess from Egypt. Israelite people. For the 8th century BC relics have been excavated there at Ugarit. The Ugaritic language was also Western Semitic and very similar to the later Hebrew in structure. I didn't say Jewish. I said the Hebrew in structure. 854 BC. Well into, the reason that's important, what I just read to you, is because we have archaeologists and historians agreeing that a city in northern Israel called Ugarit was populated by people and ruled by a king that later, after the historical record says they fled on ships, this king and his kingdom appear as Nicomedia, and it is a Greek city-state. 854 BC, well into the fifth year of King Shalmaneser III of Assyria, he invaded Syria, Palestine, and fought against a coalition of armies of Aramaic cities: Damascus, Hamath, Israel, Ammon, Egypt, Phoenicia, and Syria. This is a famous battle in the historical record. It is called the Battle of Karkar. It was fought in the Orontes Valley. It was a standoff, though in Assyrian records it was claimed as a victory, and that's only because the king of Assyria escaped. But there were Israelites that fought in that battle. So an inscription of King, I'm burping coffee. An inscription of King Shalmaneser III concerning this campaign is the first mention of Israel in the historical record. It's very interesting. As an independent kingdom from Judah. So 841 BC, the Moabite, Syrian, and Assyrian wars prompted another wave, according to the Old Testament, another wave of Israelite migrations out of the region and straight to disappear into the waters of the Mediterranean. Through Phoenician trade lanes, there was a constant stream of reports coming into Israel about the goings-on of their kin overseas. You have to understand, guys, ships, merchant ships, mail ships, war ships, cargo freighters, all these things are going back and forth across the Mediterranean all the time. People are always receiving news of their kinfolk. They know 40 and 50 years in the past that a bunch of their cousins and all that stuff had gone over here, and they get news from time to time by sailors that come back, because when sailors come disembark ships, they go seek out those they know, and they stay with them, and they share and exchange news. In the ancient world, news traveled by ship everywhere, and people were always receiving news like, oh wow, it's beautiful, we're living in a land of milk and honey, we're living in a land of timbers and great animals, and they would be describing Numancia in southern Spain. They would be describing Bithynia on the Black Sea coast, or Pontus of the Mithridatic dynasty. They would be describing ancient Armenia of the Tigranes dynasty. And these Israelite descended nations all throughout Central Asia and all along the coast of the Black Sea now, all along the coast of all the Mediterranean, they would be describing all these places, and more Israelites in the later Old Testament times would just go to Miletus, pay the shipping guilds, and they would move their whole families, whole communities, sometimes entire cities, packed up and went to Ionia, found shipping guild that would take all the people, and they disappeared. And oftentimes they even got lucky enough to get a charter. And when they got a charter, that guaranteed that supply ships would come to them as long as they paid their taxes. And taxes back then wasn't money. Taxes was have timber ready, have tin ready, have local resources ready. So when we bring things, our ships are loaded down to bring things back. This was the lifestyle back then. This was the lifestyle of the shipping guilds, the Danan. This is the maritime, these are the descendants of those Amuru who had established the worldwide Heliolithic maritime empire that was totally destroyed in the Ogygian deluge and fragmented into what I'm describing now. So, let's see. So, putting all this together, I'm just going to sum it up. What we have here is that the Exodus story, there was a major cover-up where one portion of the Israelite descended families had literally omitted the larger portion and totally forgot about them. And yet it was the larger portion that had founded the Greek states. This is why Greek institutions mirror ancient Israelite institutions. And we're going to see that here in a little while. But with the end of the great Mediterranean Dark Age in the 8th century BC, we now have the ancient Israelite families full circle back in Greece and the surrounding Thracia. As we'll see, even Macedon was founded by Israelite descended peoples. Thessalonica, all of Ionia, Turkey, Armenia, all of Spain, around the Ebro. Yeah, we're going to get to that in a minute. I'm moving too fast. 835 BC, 835 years before our calendar begins, Anno Domini, which is the year 2024 now. So we're looking at almost 28 and a half centuries ago, 2,800 years ago. Archaeologists have excavated what is known as the Stele of Tel Dan. Tel means the hill. the hill of Dan. Steel is just it's a stone writing that was smoothed down and written on. So this is the inscription of the hill of Dan, of King Hazael of Damascus. It is written in Aramaic, and it is a count of the victory against Ahaz, king of Israel, and an unnamed king of the house of Davidu, house of David. It is discovered in the year 1993 at Tel Dan, an archaeological site that has yielded forth many Israelite artifacts. This is the first archaeological evidence found concerning Judah's identity as the house of David. Interestingly, just like the earlier Moabite stone, the surrounding nations separated Israel from Judah. It's key. It's key to understanding, guys. Remember, the Israelites never signed the Yahweh contract. Even in the book of Exodus and the following books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, what happened to the Israelites? The Israelites were burned alive. The Israelites were buried alive in pits. The Israelites were impaled. Why? Because they refused to obey Yahweh. They did not like the demon from the burning bush. There was never a religious alliance between the Israelites and the people of Judah. So, Israel is called in these writings the house of Omri, which is exactly what we find in the Old Testament as well. King Omri founded the Israelite dynasty. Omri translates in Babylonian and Assyrian cuneiform to Qumri, the house of Qumri. Now, Ireland now, way up in the North Atlantic, Ireland records that an invasion of Milesians took over the Danann, and that both the invaders and the invaded spoke the same language. Imagine that. The Tuatha Danann came from Danau, straight out of Egypt. Remember, the Danann passed through the pages of Homer's Odyssey. No, excuse me, not Odyssey, the Iliad. The Danann fleets joined Agamemnon to take Troy. When they joined Agamemnon, after that, they left and they settled in a place called Milla, Spain. This is the origin of Spain. It's in the southern area. Now, Milla, Spain comes from the people of Miletus, who were Danann. Remember, Miletus is the capital city of Io, the 7 cities that Paul wrote the Christian text to, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Miletus was a major exporter of human cargo, whether it be slaves, whether it be indentured servants, or whether it be entire Israelite cities that were trying to get a charter and start a new home somewhere else. The Milesian ships went everywhere. They left it as from the city of Miletus. They went to southern Spain, where the Phoenicians had a major colony there, Milla, Spain. When they appeared in the ancient Irish traditions, they appeared as the Milesians. And it says in the Irish traditions they came by way of Spain, but we know they came from Miletus in Ionia, Turkey, an Israelite state. The Milesians spoke the same language as the Danann because they too were a part of the Israelite family of nations. The migration from Spain to Ireland is confirmed by geneticists. Geneticist Brian Sykes, he wrote that this was a large-scale movement into and from Iberia, the Spain, and was family-based, not a mere male-led invasion. Remember, the Anuna appeared in the historical record led by Enki and 50 Anuna, later called Anunnaki under Oannes. They were a male-led invasion because after a cataclysm, the females of their homeland, they were cut off from them, or the females didn't survive. Their ship was stranded. They appeared by way of Dilmun, and they entered the historical record as the Anuna in Sumer. All males. This is different. This geneticist, Brian Sykes, is saying the gene pool that came into ancient Ireland was family-based, not an invasion that has auxiliaries of other cultures and all that. So females, old and young, they all came together. He relates that this is straight out of the Celtic Pictish stock. Geneticist Sykes wrote, the Irish myths of the Milesians were right in one respect. The genetic evidence shows that a large proportion of Irish Celts on both male and female side did arrive from ancient Spain. That's Milla, Spain, which was nothing but a chartered colony of Miletus of Turkey, which is where the Israelite nation state was, called Ionia, which had 7 cities that Paul wrote, saying were populated by the lost sheep of the house of Israel. 807 BC, the northern frontier of Greece called Macedon, or Makkah of Dan, is founded as an Israelite descended nation. This makes Alexander of Macedon, who later became Alexander the Great, king of Babylon, this makes Alexander and his wife, Alexander and his famous mother, it makes them of Israelite pedigree, along with King Mithridates, the poison king of the kingdom of Pontus. Same area of the world, also Tigranes dynasty of Armenia. These were all Israelite-founded nations. Even the red-bearded, red-haired Thracians, which were kin to the Macedonians, and geographically right next to each other. 799 BC, the Mediterranean world is fully waking up out of the great Mediterranean Dark Age. And just for clarity and context, let us look at this let's look at this map. I want you to see this map. Pay attention to what I'm showing you guys. Let's look at this map one more time. This is without the arrows. Here's the map. The great Mediterranean world was literally being taken over. We're talking about 700 years after the Exodus. These people have forgotten who they are, but they still maintained the core elements of their faith and their religion. That's what we're going to get to. But here's the Mediterranean world. Asia Minor, Syria, the Libyan coast, Carthage, Mauritania, all the area of the Berbers, the entire North African coast. The Pillars of Hercules, that little tiny area of water right there that connects the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. Thousands of Mediterranean islands. You're looking at the Balearic Islands, Corsica, Sardinia, the Tyrrhenian Sea, the Adriatic Sea. Here's the Pontus, called the I can't even pronounce it, the Euxine Sea, but it's called the Black Sea. We call it the Black Sea today. All of Phrygia, all of Bithynia, all of Macedonia, Thracia, Lydia, Mysia, Caria, Crete, Cyprus, all here. Half of Italy, Sicily, all this area, every bit of it, populated, growing by chartered Phoenician and Israelite colonies that became whole cities and civilizations. In 700 years, the families of Israel left the Old Testament and literally became the Mediterranean family of nations centered at Greece. That's this map. All right. Check my chat before I go on. Y'all can tell this coffee got me wired up. So check this out, guys. We're going deeper. Believe me, this is going to blow your mind when I sum all this up, because you don't see the direction this is going. I promise you that. Thank you, Face Diver. Jamie Robbins, what's up, bro? Nelson Perez, we got to meet one day. I met almost all my moderators. One of these days, I'm going to try and fly Shiva Shampoo in here, maybe try to get him to stay in the States. Get off them islands. All right, let's do it. 799 BC. In 799 BC, Cadiz of Tartessus is founded. It is a Phoenician Hebrew port in Spain. Through Cadiz, the lands of Spain were quickly settled by Hebrew Phoenicians, the region called Iberia. What does Iberia mean? Iberia is on all the old maps of Spain. Iberia literally means land of the Hebrews. That's what Iberia means. The great river in Spain today, well, anciently it was called the Ebro. Ebro, derived from Eber, the patriarch of the Hebrews, ancestor of Abraham, Brahma, Western Semitic. The river Guadalquivir was originally called Wadi al-Hibri, the river of the Hebrews. This is also exactly what the Moors called that river. The Moors too recognized the Hebrew origin of the people of Spain. So in 790 BC, we are now out of the Great Mediterranean Dark Age. 790 BC, we have a famine cripples Lydia in Turkey. This is the ancient kingdom of Phrygia, the Frisians, origin of the Frisian people who later migrated deeper into northern Europe and provided us an amazing text called the Dutch Oralind manuscript. There's a famine in their area of the world which causes them to leave, and the stories even in the Oralind manuscript where they migrate, they go and they get to where to Frisland, they get where they're going in Europe. So Turkey is crippled during the reign of King Attis. King Attis is a very interesting individual, but we'll get to him in a little while. The populations of Lydia become divided. Half of them remain in the land because the food source can provide for them. The other half immigrate under King Attis's son, Tyrannus. These people arrived in ancient Italy before Rome was founded in 753 BC. They are called the Tyrrhenians, whom we know of as the Etruscans, an Israelite descended people, Western Semitic. Now, the Great Mediterranean Dark Age, not a trace of it around. Greece, the Greek states have come together. There is a recognition among all the Greek peoples. It's a federation, and they realize that they come from 12 core ancient peoples. 776 BC, acting on divine instructions from the Delphic oracle, which was brought from Egypt in the Exodus. King Iphitos of the ancient city of Elis instituted the Olympic Games. Remember, Olympians comes from El Elyon. These were ancient Israelite titles. This was in response to the incessant wars and conflicts between the Greek states after a plague. Once the first games of Zeus were held, Zeus was the seed. He was the seed of God. He was the Almighty. Once the first games of Zeus were held, the plague was abated. The games were derived from an older series of Olympic games called the Isthmian Games of Corinth. And this is interesting to our narrative here because these games were presided over by a statue of a Phoenician god called Melkarth. Let me repeat that. The origin of the Olympics comes from a Phoenician Israelite statue, a god that was worshipped in Canaan called Melkarth. The statue was erected and the games were played before the statue. This was the I can't even pronounce it, Isthmian Games. Now, those who became the Corinthians were originally Semitic sea traders called Phoenicians, but as we will see, they were Israelites. They brought a 7-day calendar to Greece. The Olympic festival was scheduled every 49 and 50 months. Do you know those numbers? They alternate. Olympics started every 49 months. Then, when those Olympics were over, the next series of Olympics were started in 50 months, and they alternated them. What is that? It's a Hebrew Jubilee in the Old Testament. Now, Robert Graves, the undisputed authority in all things of Greek antiquities, he wrote that there are so many close affinities between the ancient Corinthians and the ancient Hebrews of the Bible that you cannot distinguish between the two. The ancient Greeks regarded nightfall as the beginning of the day. Yet another earmark of Israel. Remember, in the Old Testament, when the sun goes down, that's when the day begins. Even in Genesis, in the Hebrew cosmology, we have in the evening and the morning was the first day. In the evening and the morning was the second day. The shar count, day count system of ancient Semitic cultures and Sumerian cultures, and later Akkadian, always started with the night beginning the day. By the time the sun came up, half of the day was over. The day was over as soon as the sun went down. Let's see. The Olympic Games signified that time in the ancient world when the descendants of Iapetos and the descendants of Shem became one people. This was prophesied to occur by Noah. This union also explains why the language of the new covenant with Israel was written not in Hebrew, but it was written in Greek. The origin of the Greek civilization text, written by Chester Starr, specifically says, while the Phoenician origin of the Greek alphabet is clear both from the shape of its early letters and from the names given to them in Greek, the date, place, and reasons for the borrowing lie too far back to be entirely visible. This is an accredited academic who is acknowledging that the two systems are one, but why or how that came to be, that ancient Israelites and ancient Greeks or had the same alphabets, is unknown. That's interesting. Old Hebrew title for God in the Old Testament is Olam, and it means the eternal. It is also found in the Greek name for the gods, the Olympians. Olam prefixes the geographical designation for the areas that they rule. Olympians is literally the eternal ones. This is the Greek gods. The Greek pantheon was Hebrew. The afterlife paradise of the early Greeks was called Elysium, a word known to be of Semitic Phoenician origin, and it literally means the fields of El. In the Old Testament, one of the chief names for God among the Israelites was El. Among the Jews, it was Yahweh. El and Baal are interchangeable. They both mean Lord or God. 745 BC, the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III invades the west and takes captive hundreds of thousands of Israelites among the 10 tribes of Israel that remained in. Now, he took the 10 tribes, which were those who passed out of Egypt overland. He did not take Judah or Benjamin. He took the 10 tribes of the north, the house of Qumri. And this fulfilled biblical prophecy saying that Israel is broken, as prophesied by the prophet Isaiah. This is 136 years after Samaria, the capital of Israel, was founded by King Omri, who founded the Qumric dynasty, which was the Assyrian name for ancient Israelites. The date of the Assyrian deportation is fixed in Assyrian eponyms. These are cuneiform texts, date calendars. Tiglath-Pileser III's annals mention that he received tribute from Samaria, from a city called Menahem, mentioning also the land of Bet Omri, the house of Omri. Though whole tribes were taken into Assyria, the capital Samaria was not yet overcome. It would be 24 more years before Samaria would fall. An inscription in Assyrian of Tiglath-Pileser III reads, Bet Umria, the house of Omri. The wide land of Naphtali in its entirety I brought within the borders of Assyria. He literally displaced hundreds of thousands of Israelites and took them into the Near East, into the Assyrian domains. We know where, because the Assyrian horse lists show us that the Israelites were taken to the northern frontiers to guard against the barbarians of the north. So, let's see. Other Assyrian references to Israel being taken captive call the Israelites both Bet Kumri, which is the house of Omri, and they also call the Israelites Bet Sak, which is the house of Isaac. Recall that it was mentioned earlier that concerning future Israel, Scripture reads, this is a prophecy in the Old Testament. It says, in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Not Jacob, not Abraham, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called. An Assyrian inscription of King Adad Nerari mentions the land of Omri as well, recognizing Israel. We have many different ancient texts that recognize that Israel was a totally independent kingdom from Judah, and they were not the same. The Assyrians thus referred to Israel by its dynastic name, Omri, which translates into Assyrian and Babylonian as Kumri and Gemiri. When referring to a people, we find the Israelites in Assyria called Gimri, Kamiria, Simiria, and Gemirians in reference to their Israelite dynasty, but in reference to their ethnicity, they were called Bitsak, house of Isaac, and Sakai, Sake, Saka, Saki, and Saxuna, which is the origin of the term Scythians. The Saka and the Cimmerians, not Sumerians, Cimmerians, Cimmerians, are the ancient Kimiri of the Greeks. They are the same people. These are the people Herodotus of Halicarnassus in 450 BC in his book The Histories wrote a lot about. Master horsemen and master archers that were wanted by other nations as auxiliaries in their armies. This is why the Assyrians invaded, not to overcome and kill the people, but to port them and use them as a buffer zone between their true enemies. And this is what the Israelites did. They became that buffer zone. Then they ended up, because one common trait of Israelites is that they are assimilationists. Other nations in the world do not have this trait, but Israelite descended nations have always been assimilationists, meaning they will take a significant portion of another bloodstock of people and introduce them into their culture and become one people. E pluribus unum. So, when the Assyrians attacked Samaria, they deported the Israelites. The Israelites, far from home, then would rebuild a city in a foreign land in Central Asia. That city is famous in world history. That city that was built by Israelites deported to Assyria, who later escaped Assyrian occupation, they built a city called Samarkand, which is the main city in the stories of Conan the Barbarian. Samarkand is a real city and has been populated for thousands of years. It's an Israelite city. Samarkand in Central Asia literally means New Samaria. Samaria was the capital of Israel. 701 BC. By this time, the Greeks of Cumae were firmly established in Italy. At this time lived Herifil at Cumae, better known as the Sibyl. She lived in Campania, Italy. She was Greek, and Clement specifically referred to this Greek Sibyl living in southern Italy at Cumae. She was called the Cumaean Sibyl, prophetess. The historian Clement literally said that she was a prophetess of the Hebrews. Here we have an ancient historian telling us that the Sibyl in southern Italy of Cumae was of Israelite stock. And yet she was regarded as Greek. You can't make this stuff up. I didn't make any of this up. I'm just reading portions of Chronicon to you in the order that I have selected. I had to eliminate a tremendous amount of information because I'm not trying to read all of Chronicon. I can't. Only the parts that are relevant to this study. The Etruscans in Italy venerated deeply the Sibyl, and now we know why. I've already told you earlier. The people, the starvation in central Turkey, where the Ionic states are, led a lot of people to get on ships and leave. And when they reappeared in Italy. When they reappeared, they appeared as the Etruscans. So no wonder they would venerate the Sibyl of Cumae. She was of their blood. She was Israelite. Now, the later Romans also venerated the Sibyl in the books of the Sibyl, especially Tarquin the Proud. Tarquin the Proud was humbled by the Sibyl. I've told that story on YouTube. But the office of Sibyl was later passed down through a succession of female prophetesses who all wrote extensive prophetic texts. That's not quite true. That's what's in some historians' writings and all. It's not quite true. The actual Sibyls never wrote anything. They were led by inspiration. Some believe it was entheogens. It doesn't matter. It was the stewards of the Sibyls that were doing the writings. It was the Sibyls that were speaking. 679 BC. One of my personal favorite historians, E. Raymond Capt. In his writings, Abrahamic Covenant, he wrote that the Assyrian cuneiform records identify the lost Israelites with the Assyrian name of Gemira, which translates into Western Semitic as Gomer. They further record their migrations out of Asia Minor. The Assyrians records reveals one group of Gemira escaped to the shores of the Black Sea during the second year of Esarhaddon, 679 BC. This is important because we have Assyrian records that are now claiming that Israelite descended peoples went into Europe to escape them. 657 BC. The ruling families of Corinth in Greece are expelled and immigrate to Macedonia, where many people from Asia Minor were then settling. This means that fresh fleets from Ionia, Asia Minor, which were Israelite descended peoples, are now settling in Macedonia, which was a Greek city-state to the north of Greece. And that the ruling dynasty of Corinth, which we already saw earlier, was Phoenician, came straight out of Israel. They're run out of Greece proper into the fringe of the north, which is Macedonia, and they become the ruling family there. This would be the pedigree of Alexander's family. It was 150 years earlier that Macedon was settled by the descendants of Israelites. Further, Corinth was founded by Israelites, as demonstrated earlier, the Ionians and the Danaan. The immigration to Macedon makes sense in this light. They merely moved to where their kindred were. 641 BC. We're at Greece is rising in prestige and power. 641 BC. After a conflict between the Cimmerians, who lost out to territorial wars with the older Scythians, the Cimmerians moved into Asia Minor and took the city of Sardis. What happened here? Why Sardis? Why would you go all the way into the interior of Turkey and enemy territory and take a city and think you're going to be able to hold it when you're surrounded by 40 other Israelite cities? The only way that makes sense is if you were kin to the people of Sardis that you came and dwelled among. And this is exactly what the Assyrian records show. The Cimmerians were of the house of Qumri. Gemiri, they were of Israelite parentage. Therefore, they saw in Sardis a kinfolk they could come and live among. This is what really happened. Sardis is an Israelite descended city in Asia Minor. 603 BC, after traveling for 540 days, a year and a half, the Cimmerians spread out and occupy the Balkans. For those of you listening to me from this area of the world, I'm telling you now, you are of Israelite parentage. They occupied the Balkans and they spread out. As Cimmerians, this immense population is divided between about 6 different tribes, all of them of Israelite origin. When I say Israelite, I am talking about the Western Semitic descended peoples that find their parentage in the Amuru, who were the Westerners of Indo-Iranian parentage, who found as their own patriarch Brahma and Saraswati, who the Jews, when they rewrote the Old Testament, called them Abram and Sarai. Geneticist Brian Sykes had researched tens of thousands of genetic samples from around the world and concludes that the largest genetic contributors to the British Isles and Ireland came straight from the Middle East as one group that migrated to the Balkans, where they became 2 groups. One group followed the Mediterranean and the Atlantic coast, and the other crossed through Europe. They left their genetic markers in Spain, France, throughout all of continental Europe, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and eventually America. This is exactly what will be shown as more and more proof of these amazing migrations are cited in this research on the origins of the Germans, the Cimmerians, the Scythians, the Gauls, and the Celts. Historian Ted Wieland wrote, "Historians have traced the migrations of the white race back to the west side of the Caucasus Mountains, but have confessed that they do not know where these millions of people came from. Ironically, these same historians have oftentimes traced the Israelite migrations to the east side of the Caucasus Mountains, as mentioned in the Assyrian eponyms. But they declare they do not know where these millions of people eventually found residence. Those historians cannot see the obvious connection between the Israelites and the Caucasians and that particular range of mountains. It is obvious from the historical record and from the archaeological evidence now available that those millions of Israelites crossed over and went around the Caucasus Mountains and became known as the Caucasians." Now, Albert T. Clay in 1923 wrote, "History records no exception to the rule that migrating people have always carried their religion with them. It will be abundantly shown that the Amorite Israelite faith in Baal, the Lord, and the worship in the groves, Druidism, appeared everywhere in Europe at the same time." Check my chat real quick. All right. Still moving, still going forward. Thank you for the donations, guys. I don't have time to personally thank you. I'm too busy in my dialogue. Awesome. Like I said, we're going deep. There's a huge plot twist here. It's going to shock you and put Christianity into total perspective. And again, I told you this video is going to be a little long. I'm shooting for 3 hours. So 596 BC, among the Medes, which are in Persia, Iran, are the warlike Sacs. This is because many of the Israelites that were taken into Assyrian deportation, especially those that were remembered in the Assyrian horse list as Bet Sac, made their escape into the enemy of the Assyrians. This is the rise of the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire, among the Persians and the Medes, was a large family of Israelite descended peoples that took up residence in Iran. So among the Medes were the warlike Sacs, S-A-K-S. These people were known widely by their patronymic name of Ishak, or you know this as Isaac. Remember the prophecy, in Isaac shall thy seed be called. So the Sacs, or Bit Shak, were very populous throughout the former Assyrian territories, the main host having settled among the Medes. A large host of these people departed, migrating through the Caucasus and into Russia, where they became known as the Scythians, a Latin term for the Greek word Scuthi, which was used to describe the Sac-Giloth, or the prisoners of Sac. Remember, they were prisoners in Assyria before they made their escape. They are called the Saki in the Persian Zendavesta writings. Remember in my prior presentations, I've showed you guys that much of the eschatology from the Old Testament is not Jewish. It comes from the Zendavesta. Prophecies in the Old Testament come from the Zendavesta. It's an ancient Persian Iranian text, religious text. Now, the Saki of the Zendavesta founded the kingdom of Sakland, south of the Caucasus Mountains, and on the Yaxartes River, they built Samarkand. Remember what Samarkand was? I just told you, New Samaria. That's what Samarkand means, New Samaria. It is the capital of Israel, just like in Londinium was originally called Trojanova, New Troy. So Ptolemy relates that a people from Media called the Saxonies or Saxai were later known as Scythians. Aeschylus, Greek historian, wrote that the Sakai were noted for good laws and were considered a very righteous people. Albinus Alcuin, in 800 AD, notably the first Anglo-Saxon scholar, wrote that European Saxons were descended from the Sakai of Asia. Pliny the Elder wrote 2,000 years ago that the Sakai were the most prominent people in Scythia, a people who settled Armenia in Central Asia. Diodorus Siculus, ancient Greek geographer, relates that the Scythians were originally insignificant and few, but had grown into a most formidable host and powerful. The great learned Herodotus of Halicarnassus, 450 BC, in his book The Histories, conferred with some Scythians and found them to be very intelligent and civilized. The Greek traveler was told by them that their race dated back 1,000 years prior to the invasion of Darius in 515 BC. Interestingly, that's for a whole race to only be dated back 1,000 years is really compelling. Most races are always trying to say that they've been around for 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 10,000 years. These people were very specific and honest. Their race dated back 1,000 years. So interestingly, 1,000 years before 1515 BC, 1515 BC, 515 BC was the year 1515 BC, when the Israelites were multiplying in Egypt, becoming a mighty people. The Egyptians called them the Hyksos. So Herodotus referred to these people as royal Scythians, a people different from the other nomadic tribes also in antiquity referred to as Scythians. He wrote that among the Scythians were the Getae. This is important. Among the Scythians were a subculture. These are descended of Israelites called the Getae, wanderers, a people believing in immortality who went after death to a god named Zalmoxis. The name Zalmoxis literally means God of Moses. The Getae lived in a land called Moesia, the land of Moses. Now in 595 BC to 500 BC, it's a 95-year window. We suddenly have a religion called Orphism. The Orphic faith sweeps over Greece and South Italy in a wave of religious reform, according to Edward Carpenter, who cites Gilbert Murray as writing, a belief in the sacrifice of Dionysius himself and the purification of man by his blood. The Orphic faith is about a Christ long before Christianity. In 585 BC, we have the fall of Judah to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar II takes Jerusalem. By now, when the Judeans now find themselves as slaves and are deported to Babylon, where they come into the contact with the great libraries of Babylonia. 585 BC. By this time, the populations of the Israelite descended Cimmerians, the Gemiri, the Cimbri, the Galutha, the Getae, the Saka, the Qumri, they were all on the move, many already settling Armenia, the shores of the Black Sea, and the Balkans. Tertullian wrote, when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonian storming, it is well known that every article of Jewish literature was destroyed, being afterwards only restored by Ezra. Okay, what is being said here by Tertullian is that the entire Old Testament ceased to exist for over 200 years, and only by a Jewish priest named Ezra was the entire Old Testament suddenly restored. The story is in Ezra and Nehemiah. My Dark Scriptures playlist, I go into great detail explaining how the book of 1st and 2nd Esdras was removed from the canon of Scripture because it is a Greek text that explains how the Old Testament was literally invented. The cover story was a politician named Nehemiah from Persia and a Jewish priest named Ezra, who literally took records from out of Babylonia and wrote this whole fantastic series of stories that they had injected in older writings that belonged to Israel, and epic cosmological writings that belonged to the libraries of Babylon. And they put these texts together. And they called it the Torah and the Old Testament books. This isn't the subject matter of this video. There is a tremendous amount of data and many, many different historians and academics that know this story. Unfortunately, this story is not told in Judeo-Christian circles. You have to go to the specialist literature. If you want to know how the Old Testament was truly put together, you need to listen to my Dark Scriptures playlist. 537 BC, Judaism's emergence from Judahite Hebraicism ought to be regarded, this is a quote, ought to be regarded as beginning with the Babylonian exile. This is according to the Jewish publisher, the Zondervan Pictorial Encyclopedia and Bible. It's put out by a Jewish publisher. This Jewish publisher is literally telling you the truth. That modern Judaism came straight out of the Babylonian exile. It is not reflective of any Israelite family of nations prior to the Judahites being taken into Babylon. That's a hell of a weighty statement, meaning everything you know about Jewish culture, Jewish writings, which is the Old Testament, came out of Babylon, not out of Israel. In the Harmsworth History of the World book, we read, Judaism was not evolved in Judah. This much is, however, clear. Judaism was in Babylonia, and it was in Babylonia that Judaism first became that which it is and still is today. This is a Jewish publisher. It was during the Babylonian captivity that the Jews come into contact with the ancient and complex doctrines, narratives, prophecies, and faith of Brahmanism, Magiism, or it might be Magiism, and Zoroastrianism. In fact, much of the Old Testament writings were influenced by Persian beliefs. Judaism owes much of its formative concept to Zoroastrianism. Told you guys this many, many times. The Old Testament prophecies are Zendavestan. So, Hebrew scholars W.O. Osterley and T.H. Robinson wrote basically that Judaism's birth was during their exile in Babylonia and in Susa of Persia. Thus, the Bible is very much a Persian, Indo-Iranian production. Flavius Josephus of the Flavians, of the Roman families, who is Jewish, Flavius Josephus, in his book Antiquities of the Jews, wrote that when the Persians permitted the Jews to return from their captivity to Judah, many did return. Entire body of people of Israel, though, remained in that country west of Persia and did not return to Judah. Wherefore, but there are 2 tribes in Asia and Europe subject to the Romans, while the 10 tribes of Israel are beyond the Euphrates till now, and are an immense multitude and not to be estimated in numbers. This is the group that the other historians are talking about that ended up in the Balkans and Armenia on the eastern side of the Caucasus Mountains. It is such an amount of hypocrisy that our historians and some anthropologists claim that we have this huge body of literature confirmed in the Assyrian text that these Israelite descended peoples made it to the eastern Caucasus Mountains, and they were in the millions. And yet, these same historians admit that the origin of the Celts and the Gauls and the Sumerians and the stock of nations from which European peoples descended from today came from the western Caucasus Mountains. But prior to their occupation of the western Caucasus, we just don't know where they came from. We don't know. It is absolute hypocrisy. But the bridge is the Caucasus Mountains. The same Israelite descended nations that made it in their millions to the eastern Caucasus Mountains are the same that suddenly appeared on the western Caucasus Mountains and literally populated the nations of Europe. 500 BC. Approximately 500 BC. The first mention of the Celts in the ancient world was circa 500 BC by the Greek geographer Hecataeus. Later, the historian Ephorus, in about 350 BC, wrote that the Celts and the Greeks had many of the exact same customs. The Gauls were interchangeably called Celts, and the confusion was ancient. They were the same people. Gauls were ancient France. And it was universally recognized in antiquity that they were one and the same people. The Celtic calendar was a relic from Hebrew antiquity, dividing the year into lunar months and counting time by the reckoning of nights and not counting by the daylight. This was a Mosaic institution borrowed from the older Babylonian, Sumerian, and antediluvian civilizations. In Genesis, we read that the evening and the morning was the first day, time reckoned by a preceding darkness that began the daylight. The Celts of old claimed to have been descended from a race divided into 12 tribes, just like the Greek states. The Greek Confederation was 12 city-states. The Celts believed that they had literally been descended from 12 tribes. One of their chief patriarchs of these 12 tribes was named Manaz. Manaz is none other than a Celtic memory of the Hebrew patriarch Manasseh of the tribe of Joseph, born in Egypt, destined to migrate and ever migrate westward. This is what was prophesied of Manasseh, a people who would move on to the furthest western part of continental Europe, Gaul, ancient France, and Spain. And then many centuries later, they would sail over the Atlantic and found the United States of America. The Celtic Gauls occupied northern Italy for a time before branching out, many settling Asia Minor and founding Galatia. Asia Minor exported Ionian and Danaan Israelite fleets for centuries, and in late history it would export Celtic people, also descended from Israel. Galatia lay at the heart of Asia Minor, and during the Assyrian and Persian empires, this region was occupied by the populous Scythians, or Cimmerians of Samaria. From Galatia, they would move in waves of settlers that would found Galilee, Gilead, and Gaulonitis. The term Galatian derives from the Babylonian word for prisoner, Galutha. Scholars assert that the mass of Judah and Benjamin remained in Media after the Babylonian captivity, returning to the region of Galilee. I'm going to repeat that. Scholars assert that the mass of Judah and Benjamin remained in Media. This tells me that the Jewish exilarchy that is in control of Jewish operations worldwide is seated in Iran today. And that all this modern shit that we hear in the news about Iran being this and that, it's all posturing, it's all BS. They're the shot callers, hidden in plain sight. I've told you guys about the exilarchy. It was originally called the ethnarchy, meaning to the Jews, it's more important what your blood is than your any political affiliations or religious affiliations, as was clearly shown by their animosity toward Jesus. Remember, when Jesus appeared, it wasn't his doctrine that they could challenge. Over and over and over, the Pharisees and the Sadducees made accusation against Jesus because he came out of Galilee. Remember, they even said, look, search the scriptures. You know the scriptures, search the scriptures. No prophet has ever come out of Galilee. The Jews had a problem with Jesus' ethnicity. Remember, Jesus of Galilee was of the royal house, was of a royal ancient Israelite house. The message of Christianity was to be taken to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And one of the principal books that contained this message to the people was the book of Galatians. The 7 Christian churches were in Asia Minor in Greece, this being because the elements of the Christian faith are actually a revival of ancient Israelite faith. I'm going to get to that in a minute. The Sinoan Celts that invaded Rome were direct descendants of the Israelites, for the Sinoan term is Latin, but it's for the Hebrew tribe of Simeon. The Celts strongly believed in the immortality of the soul, and it was definitely a parallel to the early Israelite habit that the Celts took great care in their art to avoid any representation of the natural forms in plant and animal form. They were against idolatry. The injunction against image making was strict in the Old Testament, akin to idolatry, and this adherence to this law is a chief characteristic in Celtic art. 277 BC. We're jumping now. 277 BC, we are 13 and a half centuries after the Exodus, and the Israelite descended peoples by now have fulfilled prophecy. They have filled up the coasts, they have filled up the islands of the earth, and they have totally forgotten who they are. The kingdom of Galatia is founded in 277 BC. The Gauls settled the coasts of Asia Minor from Pergamum to Ephesus. Ephesus, the city of the New Testament. Archaeologists have found inscriptions of Ionian Greeks in these cities that relate that they were being overrun by Galatians. These incursions would last 7 years until they were put to an end by the Syrian king Antiochus I in the Battle of the Elephants. This was a reunion of two ancient branches of Israel, the early Ionic and Danaan Israelites that settled Asia Minor 1,000 years earlier and had left Egypt by ship, and now the post-captivity Israelites that had made it also to Asia Minor, the land of the New Testament, by way of Assyrian deportation and migration on foot after they had walked out of Egypt. A complete reunion of Israelite families. It was here that the 7 churches of early Christianity were founded among the old Ionian city-states of Asia Minor. The biblical book of Galatians sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, or these lost tribes. We have the Ptolemaic dynasty of northern Africa. The Ptolemies were Macedonian Greeks ruling in Egypt. Israelite descended people. Queen Cleopatra was of Israelite pedigree. The Seleucid Syrian dynasty was also of Israelite pedigree. These were famous dynasties at the turn of the millennia, when Christianity exploded onto the world scene and gave us the story of Jesus. 265 BC, Ptolemy Philadelphus of Egypt had 72 scholars compose 72 translations of the 5 books of Moses, the Torah. This is complete Jewish fiction. It never happened. What did happen was that this was a Jewish fiction introduced to make it look like a book of Moses already existed, that a Torah already existed. But we already know from the academics and the scholars that no such books existed until the Alexandrian Library. The Old Testament. The very first version of the Old Testament acknowledged across the board in all the historical narratives is the Greek Septuagint. The Hebrew Masoretic text came afterward. The Old Testament was originally a Greek composition straight out of Alexandria. This is why the apostles and Jesus, when they quoted any scripture, they only quoted Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and all the scripture quoted throughout the Bible of the New Testament. Every scripture quoted was from the Greek Septuagint text, not from any Hebrew manuscript. Why? Because none of them had ever heard of a Hebrew manuscript. And a Hebrew Old Testament, a Jewish Old Testament, wasn't even written till centuries after Christianity. Guys, we have had the wool pulled over our eyes for a very long period of time, but the pieces have all fallen together. Just like I got a video showing you guys, the Jewish calendar is a complete fiction. 450 years ago, it didn't even exist. The tradition held that each priest worked alone in his own chamber, and that after 72 days, the 72 translations were brought together and compared, and they agreed wonderfully. So popular would the Greek Septuagint text become that it would be the standard version quoted by Jesus and his apostles. I'm going to tell you now, there is no way in hell that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, there is no way in hell that Jews occupying Israel in the days of a Galilean prophet would ever accept the Greek quotes from the Greek Septuagint. They wouldn't, unless it was the only scripture available. No, they would have demonized Jesus just for doing that instead of quoting the Hebrew Masoretic text. So, 262 BC, Nicomedes, remember he came from ancient Canaan, the city of Nicodim, Ugarit. Nicomedes, a Greek city-state, Nicomedes is the king of Bithynia. Bithynia is house of Enia. Bit is a Hebrew word, means house of. So we have Nicomedes, which is a Greek king now, descended from the ancient Israelites, as we saw in the Ugaritic cuneiform text. King of Bithynia enlarged the city called Astacus and named it Nicomedia after himself. The Greek name Nicomedes derives from the Ionian Israelite Nicodim, which I quoted earlier, an ancient Byblos in northern Israel. The people of Bithynia were descendants of early Ionians who were themselves descended anciently from the migrating Israelites. Now we arrived at 169 BC. 169 BC, about 300,000 Jews at this time lived in Alexandria and the surrounding land in Egypt, being the largest Jewish population outside of Judea. This is noteworthy, for the Israelite ancestors of the Jews lived in the same area 13 to 14 centuries earlier, before the Exodus of 1447 BC. The Jews live independently of the rest of the Greek metropolis in Egypt, ruled by an ethnarch. That's what they were called. This is what they're called in the early Jewish text. They're ethnarchs. They literally, their politicians were based off ethnicity. The Jewish people ruled their own courts and had many members they held high positions in the government of Egypt, and they had control of the army and navy that were all given to the Jews. Remember, Rome attacked Egypt of Cleopatra. Octavian invaded Egypt. Later, the Romans in the same generation would raze Jerusalem to the ground, not once but twice in a 65-year period. 125 BC, Judea defeats Idumea, ancient Edom, and forces the Edomite population to convert to Judaism on point of death. The Jews are cursed for marrying Edom. These are Israelite prophecies found in the Old Testament that were later, the Israelite names were traded for Jewish prophet names. Now, Edom is the people descended from Esau, the brother and enemy of Jacob, who is renamed Israel. Dr. Stephen Jones cites the Jewish Encyclopedia, which says the Edomites ceased to be a separate people from the Jews about 126 to 125 BC. Jewish Encyclopedia 1925, Volume 5, page 41 says that Edom is modern Jewry. That's pretty compelling. The reason I'm focused on this is because I know some of you like to do your own private research on the side. And if you look in a New Testament under Strong's Concordance or maybe a Cruden's Concordance or Lexicon, and you look up all the prophecies that are attached to Edom in the Old Testament, you are going to read a blueprint for who the modern Jewish people are today. It's all there. Old Testament has two series of prophecies in two independent groups of people fulfilled each one, and there's no crossover. The conquering, absorption, and forced conversion of Edom into the Jewish population bought for Judea a whole new series of woes. Until that time, the dark future of Esau's descendants stood alone. But now, as noted by Dr. Stephen Jones, the Jews became heirs of both sets of prophecies. the prophecies and curses of the Levitical texts, and now the curses and prophecies of the house of Edom all throughout the Old Testament. 94 BC, Posidonius, educated at Athens, Greece, under the Stoic philosopher Panaetius, traveled into the heart of Europe and ancient Gaul to study the Celts. This was the first expedition of its kind. Priorly, the only information historians offered about the Celts, also called the Gauls, was through secondhand sources and those who had come into contact with them through trade and barter. But Posidonius traveled far from home and civilization into the wilds of Europe. Many Celts and Gauls were Romanized or Grecianized, living among Romans and Greeks, but even they could not provide anything other than scant material. The Cimbri and the Teutons, were coming further and further south from the far north, and Posidonius wanted to write an account about these people. He lived among the Gauls for 3 years and has provided us some of the only actual records of Celtic life, laws, tradition, and cultural information on the Celts and their religious leaders known as the Druids. He recorded things that were already known as ancient Israelite institutions. One of them was the engagement of the heroic code, the best warriors openly challenging those of an opposing army to one-on-one combat. The Druids were a priestly college centrally located in Britain, but the Druids were all over Celtic Europe. They were exported from the British Islands. The Druid graduates were sent out to all areas of the continent and were accepted with honor among the Celtic kin. There were 40 different university centers in Britain, and they required a man to endure 20 years of training before carrying away a diploma. The Druidic faith was the purest form and closest in connection to the ancient Israelite worship of God, the unity in Trinity. In Druidism, there were no idols, no temples. Like the groves of Baal and Asherah, the only places that were accepted for worship were among the trees. It was a spiritual worship. One of the members of the pre-Christian Druidic Trinity was named Yesu, which is Gaelic for Jesus. The Druids maintained traditions of a great flood, a war in heaven, the 360-degree circle, and a 7-day week. Skipping over to 88 BC, King Mithridates of Pontus, an Israelite-descended nation, arranged a series of secret meetings all throughout Asia Minor in the greatest executed conspiracy in recorded history. No leader, no organizer had ever executed flawlessly a scheme of this magnitude. All throughout the cities of Asia Minor, occupied by the Romans, the local people, descended of Ionians, Danans, Gauls, Phoenicians, and Greeks, rose up on a certain predetermined day in spring and killed every Roman man, woman, and child in their precincts and cities. In the massacre, the Romans claimed to have lost 80,000 people in one day, but most historians of the ancient world estimate the losses to be closer to 150,000 people. This put Mithridates IV of Pontus, an Israelite kingdom, on the 10 most wanted list of ancient Rome. It was done because the Israelite descended peoples were tired of Roman slavery. They were tired of the Roman shipping guilds exporting captives to all known points of the world. And slavery was pretty bad under Roman law. When they burned a symbol into your right hand or into your forehead, it was slavery for life. That was the Poison King. I have a video about the Poison King. 19 BC, we're drawing closer and closer to the end of this presentation, to this truth bomb. 19 BC, descendants of Israel were settled in the Crimea. A Hebrew Phoenician inscription found in a tomb in the Crimean region from a Scythian burial was translated by archaeologists. This is an Israelite burial in southern Russian area, and it specifically reads, "This is the tombstone of Buki, the son of Ishak, the priest. May his rest be in Eden at the time of the salvation of Israel, in the year 702 of the years of our exile." 19 BC is 702 years after 721 BC, when the last of the 10 tribes of Israel were deported. In 721 BC, they were deported into Assyria. And placed in between the Caspian and Black Seas. We have another inscription found inside a Scythian tumuli, southern Russia. It reads, "I am Yehudi, the son of Mashi, the son of Yehudi, the mighty, a man of the tribe of Naphtali, which was carried away captive with the other tribes of Israel by the prince Shalmaneser from Samaria during the reign of Hosea, king of Israel." That was 19 BC. 12 BC. We're getting very close to period of Jesus. 12 BC. Augustus Caesar has a special copy of the Sibylline books made and deposited in the Temple of Apollo. Apollo was a figure prominent in the Greek prophecies concerning the last days, preserved in the Revelation record as Apollyon, the destroyer. Remember, guys, the official Roman Church history about the origin of the book of Revelation is a lie. John on the Isle of Patmos did not receive the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is an amalgamation of the Sibylline oracles passed down from the Cumaean Sibyl, from the older Greek Sibyls and oracles that were amassed and put together in a single text by a man, a student of the Gnosis named Cerinthus. The Essenes considered themselves to be the remnants of true Israel. They believed in the teacher of righteousness who was killed and then rose from the dead, a prophet. As we will see, this was a very ancient faith. The Essenes and the Druids maintained the exact same faith. The Druids were the spiritual leaders and guides of the Gauls, and even as early as the 1890s, historians have noted that the Druidic faith was basically the same as the Christian faith. Isaiah the prophet declared that God would one day in the future reveal his word to Israel, not through the Hebrew they were familiar with, but through another language. The prophecy declares that with stammering lips and another tongue will the Lord speak to his people. The ancient Hebrew word for stammering is Gael, Gael, which is the origin of the Gaelic family of Israelite descended languages, later preserved in Gaul, in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, the tongue of the Manx. Gaelic was the Celtic mother tongue. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, you're familiar with this, guys. I know many of you are familiar with this. Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the prophet Daniel is told to interpret the dream of the king of Babylon, where he sees a statue with a head of gold, and he sees the shoulders of brass breastplate. Then he sees the breastplate was of the shoulders of silver, and then the breastplate of brass, and then the iron armor of the legs, the gaiters of the legs, that terminated in 10 iron toes mixed with miry clay. Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue empires all the way to the final 10 kingdoms of miry clay mixed with iron. These 10 kingdoms, according to Daniel's prediction, shall not cleave one to another, meaning that the 10 kingdoms will never become one consolidated empire in Europe. And as history has clearly demonstrated, never in all of European history has there been one single empire that ruled it all. There's always been areas of Europe that were against the rest. The historian and philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote that the 10 kingdoms after the fall of Rome were the Lombards, which means longbeards, the Franks, who are also the Gauls, the Burgundians, Germans, the Ostrogoths, these are the Eastern Goths, the Visigoths, which are the Western Goths, the Vandals, the Heruli, the Suevi, the Saxons, and the Huns. These are the 10 major families of Europe from which all other European nations derive. Amazingly, Niccolo Machiavelli left no hint in his books, The Art of War, in his book, The Prince, and in his huge book, The Discourses, that he was aware of the prophecy of Daniel and its connection to the 10 kingdoms that finally overthrew Rome, led by Odovacar in the year 476 AD, when Rome collapsed. Also, in the year 1723, the French teacher living in Ireland, a French teacher living in Ireland wrote, "Unless the 10 tribes of Israel are flown into the air or sunk into the earth, they must be those 10 Gothic tribes that entered Europe in the 5th century, overthrown the Roman Empire, and founded the 10 nations of modern Europe." Now, the Jewish Encyclopedia reads, "If the 10 tribes of Israel have disappeared, the literal fulfillment of the prophecies would be impossible. But if they have not disappeared, obviously they must be here, but under a different name." So, Jesus declared, as I said earlier, "I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." There's a lot of supposition that the person of Jesus was a prophet and that all this other stuff about his life was later attributed to him. That may be true. It may be not. I don't know. But Judah continued to honor the law and the prophets, though they added the Talmud, the Babylonian Targums, the Jonathan Targum. Talmudicism was added by this ancient Israelite family to become who they are today, the Jews. Now, their strong affinity toward tradition, the Jews are easily identifiable in Roman times as they were 2,000 years ago. What I mean is that in the past 2,400 years, the Jews have never been lost. The Jews have never been lost. We have always had them. We have always known their identity. We have always known where they're dwelling. History books are rife with their activities for the past 2,400 years. The Jews have never been lost. Maybe this is why they refuse to accept the prophet of Galilee. "I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." His message was not for them. They had already signed another contract. The letters of Paul to the lost sheep of the house of Israel are all to Greek cities in Asia Minor, in Greece. I'm going to show you that map one more time before I drop this material on you. Let me find that map. Present. Share screen. Entire screen. All right. All right, guys. Here's this map. Literally everywhere on this map is now filled with Israelite descended nations. Now, all these cultures that I've named, from Persia, Iran, Zendavestan, all the way to Tarshish in Iberia, all the way to Numancia in Spain, all the way north to the regions of the Burgundians, all the way into the Caucasus, everywhere through Celtiberia, everywhere all the way to the ancient sites of the Irish, the Danaan and the Milesians, the ancient Britons, the Druid colleges. This map represents all the peoples that worshipped gods called Krishna, Hermes, Heracles, Adonis, Dionysius, Issa of Arabia, Yesu of the Druids, Baal or the Lord of the Phoenicians, Attis, Mithra, Osiris, Horus, Zalmoxis, Orpheus, Bacchus, Balder, Zoroaster, and Buddha. This map shows these are the regions where these gods were all venerated. Every one of these regions are Israelite descended peoples. So why is this important? All nations knew of the crucified Savior God, but there is not a hint of this deity in the Old Testament. The Old Testament also, the writers of the Old Testament also omitted all this data that I just told you about these Israelite descended nations. This all comes from the historical record, the traditional record, ancient text, ancient authors. The writers of the Old Testament wanted you to forget, to not know about all these connections. Augustine of Hippo wrote, "That which is known as the Christian religion existed among the ancients. It never did not exist from the beginning of the human race." Gerald Massey in 1883 wrote, "The actual birthplace of the carnalized Christ was never Bethlehem, nor Nazareth, but Rome." This is what that man had said. Get up here real quick. Those deities, the common denominators between all those Israelite descended deities, they're just different titles for the same figure. All those Israelite descended nations that venerated those gods, the common denominator that links all those gods together, no matter where on that map those civilizations that venerate them are now, is very clear. I started my video with it. It's a whole list. It's what all these books reveal. All these books I just showed you. All these books right here. Source materials for this list. All those gods I named refer to the Word, the Lamb, the resurrection, to the one that was born of a virgin, the son of a carpenter, was wounded by a spear, attended the Lord's Supper, descended to the underworld, slain to save mankind, resurrected on the third day. His body was eaten as bread. Divine Son of the Father, was crucified on a tree, blood redeemed earth, born on December 25th. These are the threads that link all those gods. Star announced his birth. Wise men traveled to the birth location, given precious gifts. A king tried to kill this child. He taught at the temple at age 12. You thought I was quoting Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm not. I'm quoting all these ancient mysteries, the Orphic mysteries, the mysteries of Zoroaster. I'm quoting all the text, the cuneiform text of Baal, the Egyptian temple or ossuaries of Horus. Oh, this is the story. Ministry started at 30 years of age, fasted in the desert for 40 days, tempted by the evil one, baptized in water, did miracles and wonders, fed 500 people from a small basket. I am telling you about the traditions of the Buddha. I'm telling you about the traditions of Dionysius. I am telling you about the 7 cities in Asia Minor of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. All worship the god Attis. Attis was the crucified God. He was the Lord of light, the light of the world, the God of God, the kings of kings, the only begotten Son, the Prince of Peace, the Son of righteousness, the light of the world, the resurrection and the life, the Almighty, the Redeemer, the sin bearer. Attis was the good shepherd, the Alpha and Omega. He came to fulfill the law. I'm not quoting Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm quoting the ancient mysteries. I'm telling the mysteries of Dionysius, the Eleusinian mysteries. I'm quoting the core material of the ancient Greek world, their faith, what they believed. They believed their God at one time in the ancient past had come into their community triumphantly on the back of an ass as a prophet, but would one day in the future return to our world on a white horse and would give the evil one the business. This was the core architecture of ancient Israelite faith. He suffered for mankind, had 12 disciples, preached a sermon on the mount, was crucified between two thieves. This is not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is the core faith of all those I just listed, as mentioned by the scholars and academics of the books that I just showed you. He was the way, the truth, and the life. He was called the Messiah, the Son of Man, Lamb of God. He was the Word made flesh, the fisher of men. He was the anointed one, the Christ. He was born during a tax time. He would reign 1,000 years in the future. The sun darkened at his death, and he was the Lion of the tribe of Saki. My presentation is done. I tried to keep it under 3 hours. Christianity 2,000 years ago wasn't because Jesus appeared and did all those things. It's because someone appeared from the east by way of Antioch and Galilee and Samaria. And when he walked through the ancient land of Israel, he shocked everybody awake with his teachings. 200 years later, when Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John appeared, it appeared because what this man did was light a fire into the hearts of the Israelite descended peoples. And he started a revival that continues until this day. That revival is a revival of ancient Israelite faith. It's thousands of years old, but he reignited the spark. And when he did, 200 years later, the engines of deception seated at Rome had carnalized the Christ and had attributed to him all the ancient faiths that they went and attempted to stamp out. The reason you don't know these things is because so much censorship has gone into covering up what the ancient pedigrees of Europe and Central Asia are, what their core beliefs are. Everything has been compartmentalized for you not to find. But when you put it all together, you find that through the Israelite migrations and the very deities that they venerated and the ideas and histories attached to those venerations, we find out that Christianity 2,000 years ago wasn't about a Messiah appearing. It was about someone reminding us who we were. And that revival has been going on for over 2,000 years now. Christianity is a revival of ancient Israelite faith. That's my presentation. Now I'm done. And I made it. Whew, I need a drink. It's 8:12. I almost kept it under 3 hours. I tried, guys. I didn't even entertain a lot of tangents this time. Yeah, man. It's deep. The more you think about it, it's deep, guys. It's so deep. So deep. Sit there and read all these things to you guys, and not one thing I read from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All comes from ancient texts, ancient writers. So anyway, I'll go ahead and plug my Chronicon again. The full Chronicon, you can read all, everything I just said in here is in here and a lot more. I had to abbreviate. I had to pick and choose what I was going to share just to make it fit in the video. But this is my fourth, and this is my fourth drive. It's now available. So almost sold out at the Florida meetup. This is the complete Chronicon in a single PDF, so you don't have to open up other files. It also has over 400 charts, all my best charts to help you get through Chronicon, understand the history of the world the way it needs to be understood. file. And I am going to close with that. Love you guys. Thanks for joining me. And I think my next video, I'm not sure yet. I know I'm going to do a video with Jacob Israel pretty fast. I've been talking to him. I got a huge video to do with somebody. I can't remember when, but also I got to get back on my Enoch. I know we got an Enoch video coming up too. Love you guys.